mountain of financial news to deliver clarity on one of the most hotly debated proposals coming out of the administration right now.
This is a big one.
It really is. We are talking about the very real possibility that thousands of dollars, specifically a $2,000 direct payment, could be on its way to you as emergency economic relief.
That's the critical update. And for our listeners, particularly those who rely on a fixed income, retirees or people on benefit programs like Social Security, SSI, SSDI, or VA benefits, we know your single biggest question is, do I qualify?
Of course.
We have heard the confusion, especially surrounding the jargon about working families. We are going to dedicate significant time today to provide concrete assurance about why this money is absolutely intended for you.
And this is, far beyond just some political rumor. This potential $2,000 payment is being discussed almost daily by the highest-ranking officials. We're talking the president, the Treasury Secretary, influential senators, and the updates are consistent and they're highly detailed.
Yeah.
If this is approved, it offers a necessary and, frankly, a substantial financial buffer. It could provide immediate breathing room against relentless inflation, high utility bills, and, well, the rising cost of everyday essentials.
Our mission today is comprehensive. We will break down the exact timeline, but we're also going to dissect the highly unusual, very specific funding mechanism for this. Most importantly, we'll provide the detailed technical assurance on eligibility, explaining the tax credit structure, and detailing the critical legal protections, ensuring that money is safe from garnishment once it lands in your account.
So if your financial stability hinges on a fixed income, this deep dive is required listening.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's set the stage and define the terrain we are navigating. Our goal is to filter the speculation surrounding what the administration has repeatedly termed dividend payments.
Right. That's the key word they're using.
It is. And for you, the listener, we need to be clear. A dividend payment in this context is simply the administration's preferred political term for what is functionally a stimulus check or a direct emergency relief payment. And the consistent figure attached to this conversation is $2,000.
And what's fascinating here is the sheer intensity of the political commitment. I mean, we've seen these proposals before, right? But usually they remain kind of vague until the legislative details emerge.
Sure, there's trial balloons.
Exactly. But here, the administration is front-running the plan, giving regular public updates. When Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, a key financial architect, publicly discusses the plan's funding and purpose, and the president speaks on it repeatedly, it signals that this is not some disposable political ploy.
It's more than that.
It suggests a high degree of confidence and intent to push this through, likely because they view it as politically essential for the coming election cycle.
That political momentum makes our deep dive essential. I mean, our fixed income listeners, retirees, disabled individuals, and veterans, they need clarity. They need to know with certainty if they qualify, given the confusing language, and just as important, when this critical financial support might actually materialize.
And managing expectations regarding the timeline is vital, but we must emphasize the weight of this political promise. The administration is committing massive political capital and, as we'll discuss, nearly 2 years of specific federal revenue to this one promise.
Wow.
If they fail to deliver $2,000 after building it up this much, the political fallout would be immense. The commitment level itself is a powerful indicator of a high probability.
Okay, let's unpack this first major technical hurdle. Where is this $2,000 payment actually supposed to come from? This is the most complex part of the proposal because it explicitly rejects the typical mechanisms of stimulus funding.
Right.
Like borrowing through treasury bonds or tapping into general revenue reserves.
This is what distinguishes this payment conceptually and, well, politically. It's why the term dividend or rebate is being used. The stated mechanism is the funding of these payments entirely through tariff revenue.
Tariff revenue. So break that down for us.
The plan is to strategically peel off roughly $600 billion that has been collected from tariffs, which are basically taxes levied on imported goods, and redistribute that money back to the American population.
$600 billion. That's an astronomical figure. Let's ground that number in reality. How much distribution does $600 billion actually cover, and where does that money typically go now?
The math is indeed enormous. The proposal aims to cover approximately 85% of the population, which translates to roughly 284 million eligible individuals. Now, this excludes considerations for dependents, which usually complicates the final number a bit.
Sure.
But if you just multiply 284 million by the $2,000 payment, the required cost comes out to roughly $568 billion.
So the $600 billion they've earmarked is just about right.
It is. It's specifically earmarked to fund this relief payment entirely, with a small buffer built in.
And the context for that scale is staggering. You mentioned this is not just a fraction of collected tariffs.
That's right. Our sources indicate that $600 billion is nearly 2 years' worth of total tariff collections. So to fully fund this proposal, the government would essentially have to divert practically all the revenue collected from tariffs over a substantial 24-month period.
Just for this single, one-time distribution.
Exactly.
Here is where I have to push back with a critical question. If the government is diverting nearly 2 years of tariff revenue, which normally goes into the Treasury for other purposes, subsidizing domestic programs, maybe offsetting costs of border security, or just contributing to general operational funds, doesn't this diversion necessarily impact other areas of federal spending?
It has to.
Is this truly found money, or is it robbing Peter to pay Paul?
That's a crucial, astute question that highlights the political maneuvering here. While it's politically framed as a rebate of money collected from foreign entities, the importers, though ultimately we consumers bear the cost, you are absolutely correct. Tariff revenue is not sitting in some separate, unused account.
Right, it's not a rainy day fund.
No, it is integrated into the general fund. Diverting $600 billion absolutely means that specific federal programs or agencies that rely on that general revenue will either have to go unfunded, or the government will have to increase borrowing or cut spending elsewhere to compensate.
So the short answer is no.
No, it's not found money. It's a very intentional, politically charged redirection of funds.
And that explains why they chose this specific mechanism. It allows them to position the payment not as new debt or deficit spending, which is politically toxic to certain factions, but rather as returning money that was already collected.
Exactly.
It makes the payment palatable to fiscal conservatives by framing it as a trade adjustment, not a welfare program.
Exactly. It's highly politically significant. It avoids the argument that they are printing new money or adding to the debt directly, even though the practical effect on the general fund is very similar to new spending. It's an effective rhetorical device, positioning the administration as returning collected revenue to the people rather than increasing the government's overall size.
Now let's pivot to eligibility, which is where we can provide the most relief and correct the pervasive confusion. We heard the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, use the specific terminology that this money would be targeted at working families. This single phrase caused tremendous anxiety for countless retirees and disabled beneficiaries.
And understandably so. We saw mass confusion with listeners writing in saying, I haven't worked in 10 years, I'm retired, I'm on SSDI, am I automatically excluded?
Right.
We must strongly and definitively refute the literal interpretation of working families. That phrase is purely political shorthand. It is broad, encompassing language used to appeal to the tax-paying base, but it is not a legal definition for exclusion.
So just to be crystal clear, if someone is a retiree collecting fixed Social Security, SSI, SSDI, or VA benefits, and they are not currently employed, are they still included in this payment?
Absolutely. Yes, 100%. The crucial factor here is the legal definition of eligibility, and that definition is based solely on your income threshold, specifically your adjusted gross income, or AGI.
AGI.
They do not send an agent to your house to check your employment status. They don't check your work history. They simply check your AGI on file with the IRS.
So what are the anticipated income thresholds? What's the number people need to look at?
Well, the administration initially mentioned a figure under $100,000, but based on all historical precedent from the 3 previous rounds of direct payments and, current discussions among lawmakers, the threshold is highly anticipated to settle at $75,000 for an individual filer.
Okay, $75,000.
And $150,000 for a married couple filing jointly. If your AGI falls below those levels, whether that income is derived from a salary, a pension, or Social Security benefits, you qualify.
That means the vast majority of fixed income recipients whose total income typically falls far, far below that $75,000 mark are included.
Precisely. If your income, whatever the source, is below the legal cutoff, you are included. The panic surrounding the working families phrase needs to be dismissed, because if the goal is broad economic relief, excluding the massive fixed income demographic would completely undermine the entire purpose.
It would be self-defeating.
Completely.
Let's elaborate on the political and historical confidence we have in this inclusion, because I think this context is the most reassuring for our listeners. Why are we so confident seniors and disabled individuals will be included?
We have to view this through the lens of political strategy, especially given the projected timeline, which places the distribution right before the midterm elections. Seniors and retirees are not just a voting bloc. They are arguably the largest, most reliable, and most engaged voting demographic in the United States.
They have the highest turnout rates, by far.
Absolutely. In fact, studies show seniors often vote at rates 20 to 30 percentage points higher than younger demographics in midterms.
That's a huge difference.
It is. So, to propose a highly publicized, substantial $2,000 cash payment intended to generate goodwill and economic stability, and then arbitrarily exclude the highest turnout demographic, it would be political malpractice of the highest order.
It would be ridiculous.
It would be ridiculous. Lawmakers know that distributing this money to this group is essential for achieving the political objectives of the payment. It's an incentive that targets the core voting base.
It really is.
Furthermore, we have a bulletproof track record. Let's just review the past stimulus efforts from 2020 and 2021. We had 3 rounds: the $1,200, the $600, and the $1,400 payments. In every single instance, Social Security retirees, SSDI recipients, survivors, SSI recipients, and VA beneficiaries were fully included.
So the precedent is there.
The precedent is there, and the mechanism to deliver the money is already set up through the Social Security Administration's existing payment systems. The pipes are already built.
That is the crucial proof. The logistical capacity and the political precedent are already firmly established.
And we can go back even further for dedicated proof. Back in May of 2009, the government issued a $250 economic recovery payment that went specifically and only to Social Security, Railroad Retirement, and Veterans Affairs beneficiaries.
So they've targeted this group specifically before.
They have. That shows that historically, when the government targets economic relief, fixed income beneficiaries are often the first people they ensure are covered. So the working families language is simply flavor text. The underlying financial rules are what matter.
That transition leads us perfectly to the technical structure of the payment itself. If you qualify based on income, what exactly is this payment, legally speaking? This is critical, especially for those who have very low or even zero taxable income.
This concept is the bedrock of the guarantee for fixed income people. Legally, any federal stimulus or direct relief payment of this nature is structured as an advance of a refundable tax credit.
A refundable tax credit.
This technical distinction is the non-negotiable safety mechanism.
Let's drill down on that term, refundable tax credit, in plain language. Can you explain why it is so fundamentally different from a standard tax deduction, for example?
Absolutely. Think of tax credits in 2 main categories. A non-refundable tax credit is limited. It can only reduce the amount of tax you owe down to 0. So if you owe $100 in taxes and you have a $500 non-refundable credit, you only get to use $100 of it.
And the rest just disappears.
Right. And you get nothing back in cash. If you owe 0 taxes to begin with, a non-refundable credit gives you 0 benefit. It's worthless to you.
But because these dividend payments are designated as refundable,
they flip the script entirely. A refundable tax credit means that even if a person's income is 0, and even if their tax liability is 0, they are still entitled to the full amount of the credit. The government cuts a check directly to them for the difference.
Okay.
This structure is the singular reason why the previous payments were successfully distributed to millions of SSI recipients who may have 0 taxable income and are not even required to file a tax return.
So the refundable nature ensures the payment is treated as an entitlement, regardless of filing status or tax debt. It essentially guarantees the money gets distributed to those with the lowest incomes.
Precisely. The goal is liquidity and stability for low-income populations. By making it refundable, Congress ensures that the lowest income individuals, who are often the most cash-strapped, receive the full benefit regardless of whether they engaged with the tax system that year.
This raises a point we must elaborate on. If a large segment of this fixed income population is not required to file a tax return because their income is below the minimum threshold, how does the IRS know where to send the money? What is the implementation mechanism for non-filers?
That's a key piece of operational detail that should provide a lot of comfort. The IRS doesn't rely on the tax return in these specific circumstances. For beneficiaries, the IRS performs a critical cross-reference using existing data streams.
So they talk to other agencies.
They work directly with the Social Security Administration, the SSA, and the Veterans Affairs, the VA systems. The SSA and VA already maintain the necessary banking information and address data for all beneficiaries receiving monthly payments.
So the infrastructure is already fully integrated. The information is already there.
It is. If you are a non-filer on Social Security, the IRS simply pulls your payment address or direct deposit information from the SSA's master file and issues the advanced tax credit payment that way. You do not need to take any action. No special application is required.
And that's why, in the past, if you got your benefits on a Direct Express card,
the payment will likely arrive on that same card. The only question remains your income threshold. Your filing status is immaterial.
we've established the what and the who. Now for the most pressing question. When might this critical $2,000 payment actually arrive? What is the official current indication regarding the timeline?
The official indication, based on statements from the administration and lawmakers discussing the legislative calendar, suggests the money is, and I quote, likely coming sometime in the middle of next year or possibly a little bit later than the middle of next year.
Okay, so translating that into a specific calendar window, we're looking at late summer or early fall of next year.
That's correct. We should specify this likely means late Q3 or early Q4 next year. So for anyone struggling with bills right now, this time frame is not immediate relief, and it's crucial to manage those expectations.
Right.
They are still developing the final detailed legislative proposal.
And as we discussed earlier, we have to acknowledge the political reality underpinning this timeline.
Indeed. The projected distribution window, late summer, early fall next year, is perfectly timed to coincide with the run-up to the midterm elections.
Of course it is.
It's a classic political strategy. It aims to maximize the economic feel-good factor just before the electorate goes to the polls. It is intended to, bait the hook, providing a highly visible cash-in-hand benefit right before a major election cycle.
However, we need to stress that this remains a preliminary plan. Lawmakers do not yet have a definitive, signed-off distribution date, and the whole mechanism is subject to legislative negotiation.
Precisely. This is not codified law yet. The timing is a target, not a guarantee. You should absolutely not be counting on this money arriving next month. But this target timeframe holds true unless a specific, severe external economic condition arises.
And that leads us to the accelerator condition. What event could trigger this payment to arrive significantly faster than the middle of next year?
The economy itself is the ultimate catalyst. The current sort of leisurely timeline assumes economic stability. If, however, the economy experiences a sharp, severe contraction, a deep recession, or what many analysts call a hard landing, in the new term, say, over the next 4 to 6 months,
The calculation changes.
the political calculation shifts instantly from election timing to emergency stabilization.
So in a scenario of severe contraction, the administration would essentially discard the political calendar and move immediately.
They would have to. An imminent economic crash would mandate an immediate, aggressive response. The administration would trigger massive quantitative easing, that's money printing, and immediate direct cash distribution to stave off a systemic collapse.
And that's where we hear those dramatic terms.
Yes. The source material refers to this as pulling out the dozers and implementing helicopter money, which basically means pushing cash out to individuals as fast as the payment systems will allow.
And let's address that number we mentioned in the overview. If a deep crisis were to occur, why would the intervention be potentially on the scale of $15 trillion, far exceeding the stimulus efforts we saw a few years ago?
This is a crucial distinction between preventative stimulus and emergency response. The previous stimulus rounds were focused on keeping the economy afloat during mandated shutdowns. If we face a fundamental structural crisis now, with high debt loads and entrenched inflation, the response needed to stabilize global markets and prevent a complete liquidity freeze would be exponentially larger.
Just a different scale entirely.
A different scale. Analysts suggest that given the current global economic entanglement and the risk of cascading failures, the required liquidity injection, the money printing, could necessitate deploying figures in the $10 to $15 trillion range. That dwarfs the $6 trillion printed during the last major intervention.
So the message is clear. The preliminary target is mid-next year, but watch economic indicators closely. A sudden deep recession changes everything and could mean immediate, large-scale intervention.
That's the takeaway. The current plan is political. The accelerated plan is purely economic triage.
Now, let's turn to safety and security. When you announce a $2,000 payment, you inherently invite scams, and our fixed-income listeners need detailed reassurance regarding protection from predators and financial institutions.
Safety is paramount. First, let's talk about garnishment. Previous stimulus checks included strong federal protections. Now, a few narrow exceptions do exist, specifically for federal debts like back taxes owed to the IRS or specific federal student loan defaults, and most notably, court-ordered back child support.
Okay.
But for the vast majority of recipients, the funds are protected from general private debt collectors, credit card companies, and other creditors.
Can you elaborate on the specific legal mechanism that ensures this protection? What prevents a typical debt collector from sweeping the money once it hits the bank account?
The protection stems from federal statutes that specifically exempt certain types of federal benefit payments from standard garnishment orders. And those protections are typically extended to these direct advanced refundable tax credits. The purpose is to ensure the money provides stability, not merely to pay down old consumer debt.
So the government steps in.
The Treasury Department issues guidelines to financial institutions, making it clear that these funds should be protected when deposited, often requiring banks to automatically review accounts to ensure the protected funds are not improperly seized.
That distinction provides substantial peace of mind for listeners struggling with older debts. Now, concerning eligibility for means-tested programs, will this $2,000 disrupt benefits like SNAP, Medicaid, or housing assistance?
This is a critical point for low-income beneficiaries. Because the payment is legally structured as an advanced refundable tax credit, it is generally treated differently than regular income. The federal goal of these payments is to enhance economic stability without triggering a loss of essential safety net benefits.
So it shouldn't count against you.
Exactly. The rules implemented for previous stimulus rounds ensured that the payments did not count against income or resource limits for programs like SNAP, SSI, or Medicaid. We anticipate these non-inclusion rules will apply again, ensuring that $2,000 does not cause a lapse in your critical health care or food assistance.
And for those beneficiaries who are still working, those on Social Security or SSDI who have specific earned income limits, does this $2,000 count against those limits?
No, it does not. The Social Security Administration, the SSA, has very specific rules regarding earned income limits, the income you receive from a job, that determine if your monthly benefit is reduced. This $2,000 payment is an advanced tax credit. It is not earned income.
It's a different category of money.
Completely different. Furthermore, eligibility for the $2,000 is based on your total adjusted gross income, your AGI being below the threshold, not the SSA's specific definition of earned income. If you meet the AGI cutoff, you receive the payment, and it does not affect your monthly benefits.
Now, we absolutely must spend a substantial amount of time on the scam warning. When the phrase thousands of dollars is broadcast across the news, fraudsters see a massive opportunity, often specifically targeting vulnerable populations who need this money most.
This is the most vital segment of the entire deep dive. You must be hypervigilant. We need to detail the primary rule. The Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, the Social Security Administration, the SSA, and the Veterans Affairs, the VA, will never initiate contact with you via an unsolicited phone call, text message, or email asking you for money, banking information, or personal data to secure or process your $2,000 payment.
They will never demand a processing fee, a deposit, or an administrative charge.
Never. Any contact demanding immediate payment or asking you to buy gift cards or asking you to wire money in order to receive your government benefit is a definitive scam. Let's look at specific common scam tactics listeners must watch out for.
Okay, first up, the verification link scam.
This one is rampant via text message. You'll get a text saying, your $2,000 dividend payment is pending. Click this link to verify your identity and banking information. Clicking that link compromises your device and steals your data. Government agencies do not use texts or emails for critical financial transactions. Just don't click it.
Second, the representative pay scam, which targets vulnerable individuals who have someone managing their benefits.
This one is particularly cruel. Scammers will call claiming to be from the SSA, saying there's an issue with the representative payee's account, and they need the recipient's bank account or direct express payment immediately to unfreeze the stimulus payment. Hang up immediately. The SSA communicates changes to payees through official certified mail.
And third, the tax debt scare, trying to capitalize on the confusion about garnishment.
Right. They might call claiming the IRS is intercepting your $2,000 payment for unpaid back taxes and that you must pay a fee via a gift card or Bitcoin to release the funds. This is a scam. If the IRS intercepts a payment, they notify you via official letter mail first, and they never, ever demand payment via unconventional methods like gift cards.
So the ultimate rule remains. Only trust official letters delivered by mail or direct information posted on verified government websites, such as the official My Social Security portal.
Protect your information fiercely. If you receive a suspicious contact, hang up, report it to the FTC or the SSA's fraud hotline, and delete the message. Do not engage.
What if the distribution day arrives and a listener's payment is late or they receive the wrong amount?
Patience is key, especially during the initial rollout of a new benefit. Distribution in past rounds took weeks, often segmented by benefit type or birth date. We encourage everyone to use the official My Social Security portal. It is the most reliable place to manage your benefits and get real-time updates regarding your specific payment schedule.
So check there first.
Always. Wait for clear, published government communication regarding delays. If a significant delay occurs, the administration will establish specific, published channels for reporting non-receipt, just as they did for the prior stimulus checks. Do not call the general SSA or IRS lines unless you are specifically instructed to do so.
Let's step back and look at the broader economic context. We're talking about a $2,000 payment designed to provide stability. How does the necessity of this massive one-time intervention connect to ongoing issues like the cost of living adjustment or CLA? Is this payment a tacit admission that CLA is failing to keep fixed-income beneficiaries whole?
That is precisely the connection, and it is perhaps the deepest insight we can provide today. The need for a $600 billion one-time cash injection highlights a fundamental failure in systemic support for fixed-income Americans. If the annual HLA increases were truly keeping pace with the actual inflation experienced by seniors, particularly inflation in healthcare, housing, and food, this emergency payment would not be politically or economically necessary.
And KLA is based on the CPI-W, the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers. Why is that index flawed when applied to seniors?
The CPI-W significantly underrepresents the spending patterns of retirees. Seniors spend far more proportionally on non-discretionary expenses like medical care and housing, which often inflate much faster than the general goods tracked by the CPI-W, like gasoline or electronics.
So their basket of goods is just different.
It's completely different. Therefore, the COA calculation systematically underestimates the true financial stress felt by this population.
So the $2,000 dividend payment essentially acts as an emergency supplemental COA. It's designed to fill the gap that the official CLA formula has failed to address over the past few years of high inflation.
Exactly. It's a short-term, targeted boost intended to give breathing room. It's a political fix to an economic vulnerability. Lawmakers are essentially saying, we know the structural mechanism, CLA, isn't adequately supporting you, so here is a large, visible cash payment to temporarily fix the problem without forcing us to undergo the difficult long-term reform of changing the Cameo formula itself.
That brings us back to the economic reasoning. If this payment is distributed in mid-2026 as planned, it's intended as a short-term economic boost and a political maneuver. If it's accelerated due to a recession, it signals a deeper, immediate need for massive intervention.
In the planned scenario, it's targeted relief. In the accelerated scenario, it's a necessary attempt to prevent a systemic crash. The fact that the plan is even on the table requiring the diversion of 2 years of specific revenue demonstrates the scale of the pressure lawmakers feel to provide substantial relief and demonstrate competence in economic management leading into the midterms.
This political commitment, this massive scale of funding, and the continuous high-level updates lead us to our final provocative thought.
And it's this. Given the administration has committed so hard to finding the $600 billion, diverting nearly 2 years of tariff revenue, having the President and Treasury Secretary publicly validate the $2,000 figure, the potential for public backlash if this payment is ultimately scrapped is enormous.
Failure to deliver would be a catastrophic breach of political trust, especially with the reliable, massive senior voting bloc right before a major election.
That's the key. This proposal has moved beyond the realm of mere political suggestion and into the realm of political necessity. The commitment level suggests this must happen, making it highly probable that the fixed income recipients we are discussing today will indeed receive this $2,000 payment, whether on the planned timeline or an accelerated one. This commitment is the strongest piece of evidence we have.
That context is invaluable for anyone who has been relying on these headlines. Let's bring everything back into sharp focus by summarizing the 4 most critical facts you need to walk away with today.
We want these facts imprinted clearly for your financial security.
First, the target amount. $2,000 is the current figure for this direct dividend payment.
Second, who qualifies? Social Security, SSDI, SSI, VA recipients, and retirees are absolutely included. Dismiss the working families jargon. Your eligibility depends only on your income falling below the anticipated AGI threshold, likely $75,000 for an individual or $150,000 for a couple.
Third, the timing. The current official target is the middle of next year, late summer or early fall. But pay attention to economic news. A severe recession in the coming months would trigger immediate, rapid distribution.
And finally, the protection. This is legally structured as an advanced refundable tax credit, which guarantees the money is secured for you even if you have zero taxable income or don't file taxes. Furthermore, it is generally protected by federal statute from garnishment by private debt collectors and will not jeopardize your vital benefits like SNAP or Medicaid.
We understand deeply how critical these potential payments are. They can offer dignity, stability, and the necessary financial breathing room to handle rising costs. We are committed to tracking every statement, every legislative action, and every official timeline change the moment it happens.
If you found this deep dive provided the clarity and reassurance you needed, please take a moment to subscribe and turn on your notifications. We are your trusted source for critical financial news, and ensuring you never miss an update on this $2,000 payment or any other essential benefit information is our top priority.
Share this deep dive with any friends or family members who rely on fixed income, and drop your questions or concerns in the comments below. Thank you for tuning in, and we will be back soon with another deep dive into the headlines that matter. We are diving into a major financial update today, one that impacts millions of Americans, seniors, retirees, and low-income beneficiaries who are, just watching their budgets get absolutely crushed by this persistent inflation. The headline that's really dominating the news cycle right now is this proposed $2,000 dividend check.
Right.
A payment that's intended specifically for low and middle income Americans on fixed benefits. So think Social Security, SSI, and SSDI.
And that headline, it delivers just a massive injection of hope. But our mission today is really to look past the political promise and ground ourselves immediately in reality and the data.
Okay, so we need to ask the hard questions.
Exactly. We have to ask, what is the actual timeline here? Because we are looking at, 6 to 7 months away, maybe the middle of next year, and that's a big if. That's only if this money materializes at all. So we're going to analyze the really unusual and specific source of this proposed funding, this idea of massive tariff revenue, and really dissect the complex legislative and political context that makes this whole thing so uncertain.
And before we even get into the details of that check, we have a vital, urgent warning that you really cannot afford to miss.
Yeah, this is critical.
There's a sophisticated and, frankly, dangerous new Social Security scam that's targeting fixed income recipients right now. It's using these high-pressure tactics, and it's leading to billions in losses nationwide.
Billions.
So knowing how to spot this specific fraud immediately is really your first line of defense to protect the benefits you rely on.
This is a deep dive, and it's driven purely by the sources and the facts. We're cutting through all the noise to show you precisely who might qualify for this $2,000, but I think more importantly, we're laying out the desperate, undeniable need for this relief.
Which is so real.
It is. We'll be talking about that devastating financial gap. The 18.2% food price hike seniors have faced versus the meager 2.8% cost of living adjustment they received.
Yeah, it's just a staggering difference.
And finally, we will give you actionable steps, the real, accessible, and, guaranteed benefits you can claim today, this week, while the fate of this $2,000 payment just hangs in the balance.
So this is the deep dive you need to stay informed, protected, and financially empowered in 2025.
Let's get into it.
Let's start right where all the excitement is. For anyone who's living paycheck to paycheck on a fixed income, especially after years of watching inflation just outpace their TQLA increases, hearing the words dividend check and $2,000.
It's huge.
It's genuinely life-changing news. It's a moment of hope. And we know so many people are facing severe financial pressure right now. But we have to be meticulous here. Let's look at the precise details of the proposal. So what was the official announcement? Where did this come from?
Right. So the information came directly from President Trump on November 9th, and it was through a public post on Truth Social.
Okay.
And the core detail is fascinating, really, because it outlines a very specific and I would say non-traditional mechanism for funding this payment.
And what is that?
The proposed payment is explicitly labeled as a dividend of at least $2,000 per person.
At least 2,000. I noticed that phrasing. It suggests there's a potential for more, but the minimum is clear.
Exactly. But the real complexity and, frankly, the source of a lot of the skepticism, it lies in the funding mechanism itself.
Okay, let's break that down.
So the money is intended to come from massive tariff income, which is collected from taxes on foreign goods. For little context, tariffs are basically just taxes that are levied on imports.
Right.
And the idea being promoted is that this immense new revenue stream that's pouring into the country would then be used to fund these checks directly.
And the original post was pretty broad, wasn't it? I remember it talking about the country being richest, having almost no inflation, and taking in trillions of dollars from this source.
It was very broad. And this is where we really have to dig into the political context because the initial promise was actually quite different.
How so?
Well, initially, the proposal stated that this tariff revenue would primarily go toward paying down the enormous, existing $37 trillion national debt.
Okay, so debt reduction was the first priority.
It was. But then came the pivot. The subsequent announcement clarified that the $2,000 payments made to low and middle income U.S. citizens would come first.
Ah, so they come off the top.
Exactly. Derived from the massive tariff income. And only the money that's left over after the checks are paid would then be used to substantially pay down national debt.
So that switch in priority, from debt reduction as the primary goal to dividend checks as the immediate priority, that is a crucial political detail. It really sets the stage for all the uncertainty here.
It's a very clear signal aimed at a key demographic.
So let's analyze the funding itself, though. Using tariffs for direct consumer dividends is, well, it's highly unusual. What are the financial and legislative implications of earmarking tariff revenue this way?
That's a deep question, and it's the right one to ask. First, tariffs are a notoriously volatile revenue source.
What do you mean by volatile?
Well, their collection depends entirely on the flow of global trade and the specific tax rates applied, which can fluctuate wildly based on, international relations and trade negotiations.
So you can't really count on it.
Exactly. A massive recurring $2,000 dividend promise needs a stable, consistent revenue stream, and tariffs are not traditionally seen as that stable base.
Okay, so that's the first problem. What's the second?
The second, and this is crucial, is that there is no automatic mechanism for the tariff money collected by the Treasury to simply flow into a Social Security or a consumer check fund.
So it's not like the money just automatically gets routed to beneficiaries. It's not that simple.
Not at all. To make this happen, Congress would have to pass specific legislation. This is the big legislative hurdle that really grounds the timeline.
So the money would need to be formally appropriated.
Precisely. This means the proposal has to be introduced in Congress, it has to be reviewed by committees, probably the Ways and Means Committee and the Appropriations Committee. It has to be debated, potentially amended, and then passed by both the House and the Senate, and then finally signed by the President.
Wow.
This entire process just takes time, regardless of any political momentum.
And that explains why the timeline is 6 or 7 months away, even in the absolute best-case scenario. It's tied to the glacial pace of the legislative process itself.
That's right.
Okay, let's shift gears and focus on eligibility. Who exactly is included in that bucket of low and middle-income U.S. citizens?
Based on the source material, the eligibility is really designed to capture the core groups of fixed-income Americans. So first, you have seniors on Social Security retirement benefits. That's about 50 million Americans.
Okay, so that's the biggest group.
Right. If you are receiving your monthly check and you fall below whatever income threshold they establish, you are the primary target.
And critically, this also includes the two groups that rely most heavily on federal support, either because of low income or disability.
Precisely. And we should probably define the acronyms here, just to be clear. Next are SSI recipients. That stands for Supplemental Security Income.
And that's a needs-based program.
It is. It's for individuals, often seniors or disabled folks, with very limited income and resources. And unlike regular Social Security, SSI is funded by general taxes, not payroll taxes, and it's strictly based on financial necessity.
How many people are on SSI?
There are over 7 million people on SSI, and they would, quote, definitely qualify as low income.
Okay, and the other group?
That would be SSDI recipients, Social Security Disability Insurance. This program is for those with disabilities who have a sufficient work history. And while SSDI recipients can have slightly higher incomes than SSI recipients, they are still considered fixed income and would fall within the low to middle income bracket this proposal is targeting.
So that also includes survivor and spousal beneficiaries. Anyone receiving Social Security based on a spouse's record.
Yes, they're included as well.
So basically, anyone who is relying on one of the main components of the Social Security Administration's benefits for their primary income is the target audience for this relief.
That's the idea.
But the key here, the caveat, is not including high-income people.
Right. And that means there will be income limits. They'll likely be based on your adjusted gross income, or AGI, very similar to past stimulus checks.
Do we have any idea what that cutoff would be?
We don't have the precise number yet, but the source offers a very reassuring reality check for you, the listener. It says if you are living solely on Social Security or SSI, you are almost certainly going to be under any reasonable income limit they would set.
So for the average fixed-income American, that high-income limitation shouldn't be a concern at all.
Not really, no.
Now we have to address the painful part, the heavy dose of skepticism. The proposed timeline is distant, and the political context is undeniable. We have seen failed promises before.
We have, and we have to recall the failed proposal of the DOGE checks that were floated earlier this year, but just never materialized.
Right.
That history makes beneficiaries understandably skeptical, and when you combine that fragile trust with the political timeline, it just creates a lot of doubt.
And many analysts are calling this announcement a political stunt to win back support ahead of elections. Now, I want to push back on that interpretation a little bit based on the data you're about to share.
Okay.
While the political maneuvering may be real, doesn't the need for this money, I mean, the sheer economic necessity of it, doesn't that actually validate the urgency of the promise, regardless of the motivation behind it?
That's an essential distinction to make. The political motive might be sound, but the underlying economic necessity is undeniable. The source suggests this switch from debt reduction to immediate dividend checks is a wildcard to win back support from seniors who feel abandoned by the current economic environment.
But the data shows they are being abandoned, economically speaking.
Yes. And when we transition into this next section, the data will demonstrate that this is a lifeline that is desperately needed, proving the target audience's desperation is real, whether the promise is or not.
It forces the average recipient into a terrible position, really. They're desperate for the money, but they have to sift through all this political maneuvering to determine if the promise is real.
It's a tough spot.
So the key takeaway here is clarity. The $2,000 check is a proposal. The funding is volatile tariffs. The timeline is distant mid-next year at the earliest, and it requires congressional action. And the target is clear. Low to middle-income beneficiaries.
That's the summary. Now let's talk about why it's so needed. This political debate over a proposed $2,000 check only gains its critical weight when you really understand the tangible financial struggles that are outlined in the sources. This discussion, it's not just about a potential bonus. For millions, this is about basic survival and dignity.
And we really need to quantify the crisis for our listeners. These checks are being discussed as a lifeline. And that term, it's not hyperbole when you look at the poverty statistics among our senior population.
No, it's not. The statistics are a moral indictment, really. The source highlights that right now, around 5 million seniors are receiving below poverty level checks from Social Security, and this projection extends into 2025.
5 million people.
5 million individuals who spend their lives contributing to the system are living in poverty in the wealthiest nation on earth. This is the immediate, desperate context for why a one-time $2,000 check, even with all its uncertainty, is so eagerly anticipated.
5 million people who are relying on the system they paid into, and they're still unable to meet their basic financial needs. It's just staggering.
It is.
But the real structural issue that's making the problem worse is this devastating inflation gap, the disconnect between the rising costs and the benefit increases. Let's deep dive into these numbers because they really reveal the systemic failure here.
They absolutely lay bare the failure of the current adjustment mechanism to keep up with what seniors actually spend money on. Let's look at 2 critical data points from the source, and I really want you to repeat the first one because it's so shocking.
Okay.
First, the food price increase. From January 2022 to September 2025, food prices went up by a staggering 18.2%.
18.2%. That's critical. That is nearly a 20% jump in the cost of the single most essential, non-negotiable cost of living, putting groceries on the table.
Exactly.
And for many seniors, this isn't about buying steak. It's about affording specialized diets for chronic conditions.
Exactly right. Now, contrast that crippling 18.2% reality with the cost of living adjustment, the COLA increase that Social Security recipients received for 2025. That increase was only 2.8%.
That is an impossible financial gap to bridge on a fixed income. It's just not possible.
It isn't.
Your essential groceries cost almost 20% more, but your benefit check only increased by less than 3%. I mean, what are the practical consequences of a disparity that wide?
The implications are terrifyingly real. Seniors are forced to make impossible choices. Do they skip a doctor's visit? Do they start rationing necessary medication? Do they turn the heat down in the winter?
It's heartbreaking.
The source states it very clearly that seniors are falling further and further behind every single month because the inflation they experience on their essentials, rent, medications, utilities, is far higher than the inflation the government is measuring for their COLA.
Which means that $2,000, while temporary, it becomes an absolute necessity for survival for many. It's a temporary patch on a gaping structural wound.
That's the perfect way to put it.
And that structural wound is the flawed COA formula itself. It's not just that inflation is high, it's that the mechanism designed to protect beneficiaries from inflation is fundamentally broken for their demographic.
That is the crux of the issue, and it really requires a careful explanation. The current formula is based on something called the CPI-W.
Okay, what is that?
It stands for the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers. The source correctly labels this formula as outdated and vague because it doesn't actually reflect the unique spending patterns of retirees.
Okay, so let's break that down with an analogy. If the goal is to measure the cost of living for a retiree, why does measuring the spending of an urban wage earner fail so badly?
Well, think about the composition of their budgets. A working-age urban wage earner, they might dedicate a large portion of their budget to things like commuting costs, gasoline, new clothing for work, maybe even tuition or childcare. The CPI-W reflects the weight of those costs.
Right, things a retiree might not spend much on at all.
Exactly. Now, consider a senior. Their budget is heavily weighted toward non-discretionary spending that spikes severely. Healthcare, prescription drugs, housing, especially long-term care, or specialized housing and utilities.
So when medication costs surge by, say, 10% or more, that dramatically impacts a senior whose budget dedicates maybe 25 or 30% of their spending to healthcare.
Precisely. But the CPI-W, because it's weighted for workers, it kind of smooths out that specific senior inflation because it gives greater weight to things like gasoline, which seniors may not be buying as frequently, if at all.
So the formula is literally measuring the wrong things, or at least it's assigning the wrong weights for this population. And that leads directly to that extreme disparity we talked about, the 18.2% food price jump versus the 2.8% CLA increase.
That's exactly. And this is why lawmakers and senior advocacy groups are relentlessly pushing for a structural fix, changing the formula to the CPI-U.
The CPIE.
The Consumer Price Index for the elderly. The CPIE would actually look at senior spending patterns. It would give greater weight to costs like medical care, which is the fastest rising expense for this demographic.
So if the CPIE were adopted, the VCOLA would more accurately match the real inflation experienced by seniors.
And we wouldn't need these emergency one-time payments just to keep people out of poverty.
So the $2,000 dividend is essentially a Band-Aid. It's intended to temporarily relieve the crushing pain that's caused by the systemic flaw of the CPI-W.
Right. And the structural reform to CPIE is the actual long-term fix for economic dignity. It connects the need for this stimulus directly back to the need for immediate structural reform.
The source material really emphasizes that frustration, doesn't it? If the system worked correctly, if the CPIE were already in place, a temporary lifeline wouldn't be necessary just to combat rising grocery costs.
It wouldn't. The system would be doing its job.
We've established the desperate need for this money and the long, uncertain timeline. So now, let's pivot to the mechanics of it. Assuming, hypothetically, that this payment clears all the congressional hurdles 6 or 7 months from now, how would the money actually arrive? What are the logistical steps our listeners should anticipate?
Right. The process would likely mirror what we've seen during previous rounds of economic stimulus, like the CARES Act payments or earlier one-time Social Security boosts. The most important reassurance for everyone listening is that if a real official payment gets approved, it will come automatically.
That's a key piece of information. So no need for complex forms, no rushing to fill out a new application, which we know is often really difficult for seniors with limited mobility or internet access.
That's correct for the vast majority of eligible recipients. For people who are already receiving Social Security, SSI, or SSDI, the government already has your information. They have your preferred payment method on file.
So the payment would just be initiated by the Social Security Administration or the Treasury based on those records.
Yes, exactly.
What about the different payment methods? Direct deposit versus paper checks. And what if someone has a representative payee who manages their benefits?
Well, if you receive your monthly benefit via direct deposit, which is highly encouraged for security reasons, the dividend would automatically follow that same path. If you use a direct express card, the funds will be loaded right there.
And paper checks.
Paper checks are the fallback, but those tend to experience the greatest delays, as you might expect.
And the representative payee situation.
If a recipient has a representative payee, so that's someone who is legally designated to manage their benefits, the $2,000 payment would go to that payee, just like the regular monthly benefit does, because the payment is intended for the beneficiary's welfare.
The crucial takeaway here is the automatic function. But this automatic payment system, which is great for the user, is also immediately weaponized by criminals.
It is.
And that brings us to what might be the most critical topic we discussed today, the urgent scam warning.
This is perhaps the most important actionable information we can provide right now because the threat is immediate and it is very real. Fraud statistics from the Federal Trade Commission, they paint a horrifying picture.
What are the numbers?
Consumers lost more than $12.5 billion to fraud in 2024 alone.
12.5 billion.
Billion with a B. And who gets hit the hardest? Adults age 60 and over are the most likely to report large money losses. This demographic is specifically targeted because they rely on a fixed income and are highly susceptible to scare tactics involving their benefits.
The harsh irony is that whenever the government announces automatic payments, even if they are 6 months away, that information becomes immediate ammunition for criminals.
Immediately.
Let's describe this sophisticated new Social Security scam using the details provided so our listeners know exactly what to listen for if their phone rings today.
Right. This new scam relies on high-pressure scare tactics and extremely official-sounding language. The caller will use a sophisticated system to spoof their number, which makes it look like the call is coming from a legitimate government office, maybe even the local police or the main SSA line.
And they impersonate highly authoritative figures.
They do. They'll say they're from the Social Security Administration, the Attorney General's office, or sometimes they'll even claim to represent the Supreme Court or the Department of Homeland Security. They leverage these titles to instill immediate, overwhelming fear.
And what's the specific threat they use? Describe the narrative the scammer uses to force their victims to act fast.
So the scammer will sound very official. They might read you a badge number or a case file number. That, of course, doesn't exist. They will claim the victim's Social Security number has been suspended due to a massive criminal investigation, or that it's being used to smuggle drugs or commit identity fraud in a border state.
So they create a state of panic.
A total state of panic. They'll say that if the victim hangs up, local police will arrive to arrest them immediately. And then they demand immediate payment or your financial information to clear your name and unsuspend your number.
We need to arm our listeners with an unbreakable rule regarding these calls. What is the fundamental non-negotiable rule, the source stresses, that proves these calls are fake every single time?
The rule is absolute and it must be memorized. The Social Security Administration will never call you out of the blue and threaten to suspend your number. They will never demand immediate payment, and they will never ask you to verify your personal information over the phone.
That's just not how they operate.
It is not how they operate. If there were a legitimate problem with your benefits or your account, the SSA relies on official, formal letters sent via certified mail or communications through the secure My Social Security portal, not unscheduled, threatening phone calls demanding money to avoid immediate arrest.
Now, we also have to address the specific scams that will inevitably arise because of the $2,000 announcement itself. This is a second layer of fraud to watch out for.
Yes, this is distinct. Once the $2,000 checks are formally announced or even just widely debated in the news, scammers will start calling. They'll claim they can help you claim your payment for a fee.
So they might say you need to pay a mandatory processing fee of, say, $99.
Or a registration fee to ensure you get priority, or even a tax advance. They will use the language of the $2,000 check to gain immediate trust.
And the absolute truth regarding these stimulus claims is what?
Do not fall for this. You do not need to pay anyone, not a tax preparer, not a lawyer, and certainly not some random person on the phone, to receive an automatic government benefit. If the $2,000 payment is approved, it is automatic and it is free. Anyone charging a fee for this is a scammer, plain and simple.
So we have the danger defined. What are the clear, immediate action steps for safety? Someone receives one of these high-pressure threatening calls. What do they do in that moment of panic?
If you are contacted by phone, email, or letter about a problem with your Social Security number or about claiming a benefit for a fee, your immediate action is simple and decisive. Hang up immediately.
Don't engage at all.
Do not engage. Don't give any information, personal, financial, or otherwise. And this is vital, the source warns. Do not send money or buy gift cards.
The gift card scam.
Scammers frequently demand payment in gift cards, like from Amazon, Google Play, or Target, because they are essentially untraceable cash.
What if the listener is genuinely worried the call might have been real, despite our warnings, and they want verification? What's the safe way to do that?
That's a valid and a smart concern. The reliable process is to call Social Security directly after you hang up the phone. Use the official, verified, toll-free numbers that you can find on the SSA website, not a number the caller gave you.
Right. Never use their number.
Never. The source acknowledges that waiting on hold can be frustrating, potentially for hours, but this is the necessary step for essential protection. Do not call back a number provided by a suspicious caller. Protection is paramount because $12.5 billion was lost last year, and we don't want you to become part of that statistic.
Absolutely not. Okay, so we need to shift the focus now to empowerment. We've spent a lot of time analyzing a payment that's 6 or 7 months away and highly uncertain.
And we want to encourage a strategy of maximizing control over your immediate financial situation.
The source material is very clear on this. Don't spend your time waiting around for a stimulus check that might not come for months or might not come at all.
Right.
Instead, focus on reliable, guarantee benefits that are accessible this week. It's about leveraging the system you've paid into and taking control of what is controllable.
Exactly. While a $2,000 one-time check is a massive headline, many existing federal and state programs provide benefits that, over the course of a year, can easily exceed that $2,000 amount. And they are available today, right now.
And the source details 4 crucial real benefit programs that recipients of Social Security, SSI, and SSDI should be investigating immediately.
That's right.
Let's start with healthcare, because medical costs and prescription drugs are often the largest and most volatile budget drain for seniors, especially given that CPI-W flaw we talked about.
The first one is extra help with Medicare, which is also known as the Low-Income Subsidy, or LIS. This program specifically reduces or eliminates prescription drug costs under Medicare Part D. This is huge. And the crucial detail here is that millions of seniors and people with disabilities who qualify for this are not enrolled. This program helps pay your Part D monthly premium, your deductible, and your co-payments.
So how does someone know if they might qualify? What are the rough income and resource parameters for something like that?
Well, eligibility varies slightly each year, but generally for 2025, if you are single, your resources, so that's savings, stocks, bonds, not counting your home or your car, are usually capped around $16,000, and your annual income should be below roughly $22,000.
And for a married couple?
For a married couple, the resource limit is around $32,000. Now, if you are already receiving Medicaid, SSI, or a Medicare savings program, you're actually automatically enrolled, which is a major advantage. If you qualify, this could save you several $1,000s annually on prescription costs alone.
That's incredible. Okay, second, and perhaps the most urgent program given that 18.2% food price shock we discussed, is food assistance.
That's SNAP benefits, or what many people know as food stamps. Given the extreme rise in grocery costs, which we established is outstripping CPI increases by a factor of 6, this program is essential for survival.
And the source emphasizes that seniors and people on Social Security can and should get SNAP. A lot of people assume SNAP is only for younger families, but that is simply not true.
Not true at all.
And what kind of financial relief can SNAP provide?
The potential benefit is significant, and it's recurring. We're talking between $100 to $200 or more per month for groceries, depending on your household size and income.
So over a year, that quickly exceeds the $2,000 proposed stimulus.
Easily. And it's reliable, predictable money that's available today. Furthermore, if you're an SSI recipient, you automatically qualify for SNAP in many states, which simplifies the application process entirely.
And where do you apply?
You typically apply through your state's Department of Social Services or Department of Health and Human Services.
Okay, so every dollar for groceries is a dollar not taken from rent or medicine. Now let's talk about utility costs, especially as we move into severe weather seasons.
That's where the third program comes in, LIHEAP, the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program. This is assistance specifically designed to help low-income households manage their heating and cooling bills.
And those utility costs are non-negotiable, and they can spike during peak seasons, placing enormous strain on fixed budgets.
They can.
What should people know about applying for LIHEAP?
Well, unlike Social Security, LIHEAP is state-run, but it's federally funded. Applications are open right now in most states, and successful recipients could receive several $100s, often as a one-time payment made directly to their utility company.
And what are the income limits like?
They're typically based on 60% of the state median income. So many individuals on Social Security or SSI will easily qualify. This program is critical because it prevents that terrifying choice between keeping the heat on and buying food.
Absolutely. Okay, and the fourth benefit focuses on reducing the costs associated with Medicare itself, which again is a major budget item not properly accounted for by the current COLA formula.
Right. These are the Medicare Savings Programs, or MSPs. They are designed to help pay for Medicare premiums, deductibles, and copays. The source emphasizes the transformative financial impact here. For some people, the potential savings can exceed over $2,000 per year.
Wow.
The key is that MSPs can pay your Medicare Part B premium.
And that Part B premium is a standard deduction that comes out of everyone's Social Security check. So if an MSP pays that, that's immediately hundreds of dollars back in their pocket every single month.
Exactly. There are 4 different MSPS, QMB, SLMB, QI, and QDWI. QMB, the Qualified Medicare Beneficiary Program, is the most comprehensive. It covers Part B premiums, deductibles, and coinsurance. For those who qualify, just eliminating the Part B premium deduction alone can free up significant monthly income, providing a permanent financial boost that far surpasses a temporary $2,000 check.
So these 4 programs, Extra Help, SNAP, LIHEAP, and the Medicare Savings Programs, they represent real, reliable money that can start flowing this month. What's the single best first step the listener can take to investigate these opportunities without getting overwhelmed?
The source provides an excellent, actionable, and free tool. Step 1 is to go to benefits.gov and use the free benefits calculator.
Benefits.gov.
Right. This calculator asks a series of non-intrusive questions about your income, household size, and location, and it is designed to show you every federal and state program, including the 4 we just mentioned, for which you might qualify.
So it's a comprehensive, non-judgmental way to maximize your available benefits without waiting for uncertain political promises.
It's about empowering the listener to take action on the things you can control right now, rather than being held hostage by political timelines.
We have dissected the $2,000 proposal, we've exposed the critical inflationary crisis, and we've provided immediate actionable steps. Let's finish by connecting the dots. The $2,000 dividend is a headline, but where does it fit into the larger conversation about structural Social Security reform?
It's crucial to reiterate and clarify this point. The $2,000 dividend is strictly a proposed one-time payment. It's a temporary lifeline. It is not a structural, long-term fix like permanent CLA reform. The permanent fix requires pushing for the adoption of the CPI-E that we detailed earlier, the change that would ensure future CLAs match the actual inflation experienced by seniors, rather than creating that unsustainable 18.2% versus 2.8% gap year after year.
So even if this $2,000 payment were to pass, the root cause of the poverty crisis, that broken KLA formula, would still be active. It would continue to erode purchasing power in the following year. This is just a stopgap.
Exactly. The stimulus gives you some breathing room. Perhaps it lets you pay a few months of overdue bills or replenish a depleted savings account. But it doesn't solve the long-term issue of 5 million seniors living below the poverty level.
So true economic dignity requires the political will to change the calculation mechanism itself, ensuring that the cost of medication and housing is properly weighted.
It does.
And that brings us to the final element of empowerment: advocacy. The source encourages listeners to transition from frustrated spectators to active participants in the push for change. How can they make their voice heard effectively, beyond just relying on a proposed dividend?
Direct data-driven action is necessary because, as the source states, politicians respond to pressure. The most effective tool you have is contacting your elected representatives, your senators, and your members of Congress.
And when you contact them, it's important not to just express general frustration.
No. Use the specific, undeniable data points we covered today to make an evidence-based demand.
So give us the specific talking points that hold the most weight when you're speaking to a congressional office.
You must communicate the reality of the situation. Tell them about the 5 million seniors currently living below the poverty level in the United States. This statistic is jarring and it's unacceptable.
And then provide that critical comparison.
Yes. Stress that food prices have gone up 18.2%, while the COLA only rose by 2.8%. This conflict disparity is easy for policymakers to understand, and it's very hard for them to dismiss. This data makes the case for immediate intervention and long-term reform, like adopting the CPI-E.
And that shifts the conversation from just a general complaint to a precise, data-driven demand for economic justice and structural reform.
And that ties into the broader emotional reality that the source addresses. We have to acknowledge the deep frustration that beneficiaries feel. They deserve better than empty promises and political games after working their whole lives, paying into the system, raising families, building communities.
They deserve to live out their years with dignity, security, and certainty.
They absolutely do.
And for those who are struggling and maybe feeling some shame about needing to rely on these real benefits we discussed in the last section,
The final encouragement is crucial. Don't feel ashamed for needing help. These programs, SNAP, LIHEAP, Medicare assistance, they are not charity. They are benefits that were earned through decades of contribution to society.
that's such an important point.
The goal is simply to ensure every eligible American receives every benefit they are due, whether it's a proposed dividend check or an existing assistance program. Use the resources available, like benefits.gov, and do so today.
That wraps up our extensive analysis of the $2,000 proposal, the inflation crisis, and the immediate guaranteed steps you can take today. Let's quickly summarize the core takeaways you need to remember.
First, the proposed $2,000 check timeline is distant and uncertain. It's slated for the middle of next year, and its approval depends on a lengthy congressional process that's fueled by potentially volatile tariff revenue.
Second, eligibility covers low and middle-income Social Security, SSI, and SSDI recipients.
Yeah.
You'll need to fall below an income limit, but if you rely solely on these benefits, you are almost certainly covered.
Third, and this is the most urgent one, be absolutely alert for SSA and stimulus scams. Remember that unbreakable rule: never pay a fee to receive an automatic benefit, and Social Security will never call you and threaten to suspend your number or demand gift cards.
Hang up immediately and use the official SSA number to call back.
And fourth and most actionable, focus on the real benefits you can claim this week. That's SNP, All-You-ET, Extra Help with Medicare, and the Medicare Savings Programs. These can provide over $2,000 in annual savings and relief. Use benefits.gov as your resource starting today to find every program you qualify for.
We've examined the political debate and the economic hardship that makes this $2,000 proposal so necessary.
And the value of this deep dive is really reinforcing the importance of being informed and protected, and most importantly, of taking action on the controllable factors that are right in front of you.
The discussion about the current COA formula, the CPI-W, versus the proposed change to the CPI-E, it really highlights a fundamental choice facing our political leaders. The question isn't just what the politicians prioritize, but what data point, the minimal 2.8% general COA or the crushing 18.2% food hike, will you use when you call your representative today to advocate for change? This is the ongoing fight for economic dignity, and it is a fight that's driven by your voice and the data we've provided.
If this deep dive helped you understand what is real and what is just political posturing, and if it gave you the tools to protect yourself and find guaranteed benefits today, please share this information immediately with others in your network who need it.
And we want to know what you think. If you support these $2,000 checks for seniors and low-income Americans, please go into the comments right now and write, "I support $2,000 checks."
Your voice matters, and we will continue to monitor these developments and bring you the clear, factual insights you need to navigate these uncertain times. Thank you for diving deep with us. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are really cutting through all the noise today to give you the essential financial truth.
And there is so much noise right now.
There really is. But right now, there is one single announcement that's just dominating the conversation. And honestly, it's causing a lot of anxiety, but also a lot of hope for millions of Americans.
That's exactly right. We're focused today on a pretty major financial update. We're talking about the possibility of a new A really substantial direct payment.
A dividend, they're calling it.
Yes, a dividend of $2,000, maybe even more, that has been discussed at the very highest levels of government. So, this isn't just a theory. This is a live, ongoing discussion.
A discussion about delivering, crucial money directly to you.
Exactly.
And this specific proposal, it's made massive headlines. You can't miss it.
Of course, the scale of the payment is huge.
It is. But for our community, and we mean for those of you relying on Social Security, on SSI, SSDI, or VA benefits, the core question is, well, it's simple and it's really urgent.
It's always the same question, isn't it?
It is. Will this money finally reach retirees? Will it reach people on fixed benefits without some arbitrary exclusion?
And that frustration it's more than just palpable. It's historically justified. We've heard from hundreds of our listeners who just feel perpetually left out of these big relief announcements.
They feel forgotten.
Totally forgotten.
Yeah.
There's this deeply ingrained skepticism among Social Security, SSI, SSDI, and VA beneficiaries. They just assume, and maybe rightly so, that there's going to be a footnote or an asterisk somewhere that somehow excludes them.
We want to validate those concerns right away. We absolutely hear you, and we understand that history has, created this high degree of skepticism about whether you're eligible.
It makes perfect sense.
It does, and that's why our mission today is very specifically tailored to answer that one question. What about us? We want to provide some concrete clarity based on the source material we actually have.
And we are working directly from presidential remarks concerning this $2,000 plus dividend. So we're going to unpack the specific, really crucial language that's been used to figure out the true eligibility for the low-income and fixed-income community.
So if you're out there, you're struggling with rising costs, you're relying on those monthly checks to get by.
This deep dive is for you. We really need to know if this potential $2,000 or even more is truly coming your way.
Okay, let's get into it. Let's unpack this. We have a direct statement, a key quote that really sets the stage for what this payment is supposed to be.
Right.
And it focuses on two really important phrases that seem to be at odds with that skepticism we were just talking about.
Exactly. The core language we're analyzing right now is this statement about a distribution of funds. And the phrases that matter most are, first, at least a $2,000 dividend for everyone will be paid.
For everyone. Okay.
And then, immediately following that, the exclusion, not high-income people.
Those 4 words, everyone, and not high-income people. That's everything, isn't it?
Those are the hinges upon which this whole discussion turns. This is the official starting point for analyzing this. And on the surface, those 2 phrases, they really seem to suggest maximum inclusion.
It sounds incredibly broad.
It does. And this brings us immediately to the mechanism of the payment, which is so crucial because it's what differentiates this proposal from the 3 previous stimulus checks we saw back in 2020 and 2021.
How so? What's different?
This money's being discussed not as, traditional relief spending that's funded by borrowing or domestic taxes. This is being framed as a distribution derived specifically from tariff revenues.
Tariffs. Okay, let's stop right there and explain that distinction because that is really, really interesting. When we talk about tariff revenues, what are we actually talking about?
We're talking about money that's collected by the government through international trade duties. So basically taxes that are levied on goods imported into the country.
And why is using that money tariff revenue? Why is that so different, both politically and economically, from just, printing money or using general tax revenue like before?
That's where this deep dive really begins. See, when the previous stimulus checks were issued, they were typically funded by debt. The government either borrowed the money or used existing general funds. And that, it increased the national deficit.
Which is always a point of contention.
Always. But using tariff revenue, that creates a completely different narrative.
Yeah.
It allows the proponents to say, look, we're taking money collected from foreign trade actions, and we are giving it directly back to American citizens.
So it's framed less like a government handout and more like a benefit?
A policy benefit, exactly. Something derived from an economic strategy rather than a domestic relief bill designed to fight a crisis. It completely shifts the discussion from government spending to revenue sharing.
That's a very clever distinction.
It is. It provides a very distinct why behind this specific proposal. The idea is that the government takes revenue generated through these economic measures, the tariffs, and then distributes it back to the public as a dividend.
And that political framing might make the payment more palatable to lawmakers who are normally pretty resistant to deficit spending.
Precisely.
Okay, so this brings us back full circle to our core question, which is so critical for our audience. Because when they hear that word everyone, they immediately and understandably become skeptical.
They remember past exclusions. They remember confusing eligibility rules.
Exactly. And we really need to remember the sheer size of the community we're talking about here. It's massive.
Oh, the range of beneficiaries is immense, and their dependence on these fixed benefits is acute. We're talking about Social Security retirees who've seen their savings just decimated by inflation.
We're talking about veterans receiving VA benefits.
Individuals on SSDI due to disability, SSI recipients who are living right at the poverty line.
Don't forget Railroad Retirement Board beneficiaries, and of course, people receiving spousal and survivor benefits.
All of them. And they're all asking the same thing. Is this time going to be different?
That feeling of being sidelined, of being excluded, it's so legitimate.
Yeah.
Historically, the devil has always been in the details, right?
Right.
Or in some specific definition in the funding mechanism.
But this time the language is unusually broad. Everyone is included. The only people excluded are high-income people.
So let's just deliver that initial broad answer right now, based purely on the analysis of the language in this funding mechanism. Let's just try to alleviate some of that immediate anxiety.
Let's do it.
Give it to us straight. Are the low-income fixed benefit communities included in this?
Okay, the simple answer is this. Broadly, yes. Based on the language, at least a $2,000 dividend for everyone will be paid, not high-income people. There's absolutely no reason these groups would be excluded.
There's a big condition there.
There is, provided their income is below the eventual threshold.
That is the critical distinction we have to hammer home. Eligibility is not tied to your benefit type. It is tied purely to your income level.
Right. It's income-based, not benefit-based. They just don't typically structure these laws to say everyone gets this except, the people who rely on Social Security for a living.
Yeah.
That's not how it works.
That would be political suicide.
Exactly. The current proposal, as we have it, focuses only on excluding high-income earners. So if you're a Social Security recipient or a low-income recipient of SSI or SSDI, you are, by definition, the community this payment is designed to support. You are the non-high-income bracket.
So we've established that the eligibility, at least in theory, is broad. So now we have to zoom in on that one crucial phrase that determines everything.
Not high-income people.
That definition holds the key to the vault.
And this is where we really need to focus our critical thinking and apply some historical data. Because the entire eligibility question hinges on how the government defines a high-income person for this specific purpose.
This is the only barrier.
The only barrier mentioned in the proposal. It makes that income threshold the absolute immovable dividing line.
Okay, so let's establish some serious historical context here, because that's really the single best predictor we have for what lawmakers consider high income when they're designing these kinds of payments.
We don't have the current threshold defined yet, no, but we have excellent precedent from those three prior major stimulus checks.
Back in 2020 and 2021.
Exactly. So to project the likely cutoff for this $2,000 plus dividend, we have to do a deep dive into the historical cutoffs that the IRS used. And those past checks, they relied on a metric called adjusted gross income.
AGI.
AGI, yes.
Let's pause right there because AGI is such a crucial term, but it causes a lot of confusion, especially for seniors who might not file taxes or who might be confused about how their benefits even factor in. So in simple terms, what is adjusted gross income?
Okay, simply put, AGI is your total income. So that includes wages, interest, any capital gains, retirement distributions, and in some cases, the taxable portions of your Social Security. And then you subtract certain allowable deductions. For most people on fixed income, their AGI is very, very low.
Why is that?
Because the majority of their Social Security income may not even be taxable, or they might only have some modest pension income on top of it. So the number ends up being quite small.
So AGI is the number the government used in the past to decide who was high income. Let's look at those historical AGI cutoffs. What were they?
Okay. For the first stimulus check in 2020, the one for $1,200.
I remember that one.
The individual threshold for the full payment was an AGI of $75,000. But the payment didn't completely phase out. It didn't disappear until an individual's AGI hit $100,000.
$100,000.
So the first standard for high income was effectively $100,000.
That's a key figure. And $100,000 for an individual, I mean, that felt pretty inclusive at the time.
It did. But that standard shifted. And it shifted quickly. By the time we got to Stimulus Check 2, the $600 one, and Stimulus Check 3, the $1,400 one,
Right.
The threshold had been lowered substantially. And the idea was to target the relief more stringently toward lower-income Americans.
So what did it drop to?
Well, the threshold for the full payment, it stayed at $75,000 for individuals, but the maximum phase-out point was dropped sharply. The payment often ended completely for individuals making above, say, $80,000 or $90,000.
So why did they drop that threshold, that reduction from 100,000 down to around 75,000 as the starting point for that phase out? I mean, that's a significant political move.
It really is. And it speaks to the political drive to make sure that these relief funds are highly targeted. The lower you set that AGI threshold, the fewer middle and upper middle class people receive the money.
Which saves the government money overall.
It saves money, and it theoretically lets them focus the impact on those most acutely in need, which of course includes our fixed income community.
But hold on, you raised a really interesting point earlier. This $2,000 dividend is coming from tariffs. It's a totally new funding mechanism for this kind of widespread relief.
It is.
So why are we relying so heavily on the old IRS stimulus rules for the income cutoff? Couldn't they define high income using a completely different metric this time? Maybe, I don't know, net worth instead of AGI?
That is a brilliant question. I mean, it gets right to the heart of the uncertainty here. And while it's true the funding mechanism is new, the logistical mechanism for actually distributing the money,
Getting it to people.
that is almost certainly going to be the IRS. Because they're the ones who hold the records needed to verify income through tax data. And that's true even for non-filers who get benefits.
So trying to change the metric from AGI to something like net worth would be a nightmare.
An administrative nightmare. It would introduce impossible complexity and, significant delays. It's just not practical.
So tradition and just administrative ease suggests that $75,000 individual AGI mark is still the most likely standard for triggering the phase-out.
Or perhaps even that higher $100,000 mark just for the sake of political expediency.
It's hard to say for sure.
It is. But we're operating under the highly probable assumption that the definition of high income will be at or very near that $75,000 to $100,000 AGI range for individual.
And for married couples.
Likely double that. So $150,000 to $200,000 for married couples filing jointly.
And this is the critical connection point for our audience. We need to relate these numbers directly to the reality of being a Social Security, SSI, SSDI, or VA beneficiary.
Let's be blunt about it. For the vast, vast majority of our fixed income listeners, the retirees, the survivors, the disabled individuals, the low-income veterans, the notion of earning an adjusted gross income of $75,000 or more per year.
It's just not their reality.
It's simply non-existent for most.
We can say with a lot of confidence that if you are living primarily or solely on fixed benefits, you are highly unlikely to be anywhere near that threshold.
Think about it. Even someone who's receiving the absolute maximum Social Security benefit, which is around $3,800 a month right now.
Which is very rare.
Very rare.
Yeah.
But even they only bring in about $46,000 a year. And not all of that is even taxable, which lowers their AGI even further.
So that's why the language is so reassuring. Eligibility hinges purely on income. The law doesn't exclude Social Security beneficiaries as a group.
It excludes high-income earners. So if you're in the fixed income community, you are, by definition, intended to be included in this.
The only way a Social Security recipient might be excluded is if they have substantial other income. Maybe a big pension, significant investment income, or a large second job that pushes their AGI over that expected $75,000 to $100,000 cutoff.
And that is, as you said, a very fortunate and very small minority among this population.
Okay, so we've established that based on income history, the vast majority of our audience should be eligible. So now let's tackle some of the administrative and logistical myths that always pop up.
Especially the ones about tax filing. That is a major source of confusion for older Americans.
Myth number one, the one that always produces so much anxiety. I don't file a tax return, so the government doesn't know who I am, and this payment isn't for me.
Right.
This misunderstanding, it's rooted in decades of tax procedures, but it needs to be completely, thoroughly eliminated.
It really does. This concern has to be fully addressed and just dismissed with authority. Filing a tax return has absolutely nothing to do with eligibility or the distribution of this $2,000 plus dividend money for the fixed income population.
So whether you file a Form 1040 or not,
It is completely irrelevant to receiving the payment.
tell us why that is. If it's not from a tax return, where is the government getting the information?
Because if you are a fixed income beneficiary, If you're getting Social Security, retirement, SSI, SSDI, or VA benefits, the government already has all your essential payment information on file.
It's managed by the SSA or the VA?
Oh, the Railroad Retirement Board, exactly. They already have it.
So they already know your direct deposit bank account details. They know if you use a Direct Express card. They know your current address for a paper check.
Correct. They don't need the IRS to tell them where you live or where to send the funds. During the previous stimulus checks, the IRS and the Treasury Department successfully used these existing SSA and VA files to get payments to non-filers seamlessly.
So they've done this before.
They've done it 3 times. It established a functional, proven infrastructure that just bypasses the entire tax return filing process for this specific group. The presidential remarks said nothing about needing a tax return. The focus was purely on income and the revenue source.
So we have to give the disclaimer that, this is not personalized tax or accounting advice.
Of course.
But the historical precedent is overwhelmingly clear. Your filing status has nothing to do with getting these specific relief payments if you're already receiving federal benefits.
Okay, let's move on to myth number 2. This is only for people who are currently working or are disabled but looking for work. Does the source material suggest this payment is employment-based at all?
Not in the slightest. The source material confirms the criteria are purely income-based. This is a dividend, intended to be shared among eligible Americans.
So it doesn't matter if you're fully retired.
Fully retired, permanently disabled, or even working a minimal part-time job that keeps you under the income threshold, it does not matter. It is a calculation based on your AGI, not your employment status.
And that is a huge relief for so many people. People on SSDI who face really strict earnings limits, or for seniors who have fully left the workforce.
So your status is irrelevant.
Your income level is the only metric that counts.
Absolutely. Okay, now let's clarify how the income thresholds usually work for people who might be, close to that limit. That important phase-out mechanism. We need to be specific here, maybe give some scenarios so people can really understand the math.
Right. A phase-out is critical because it prevents what we call an eligibility cliff, where one extra dollar of income makes you lose the whole payment.
Nobody wants that.
No. So when income exceeds the limit, and let's just assume for now the full payment threshold is $75,000 AGI for an individual, there's typically a gradual reduction in the payment amount.
Okay, let's use a hypothetical situation based on the old rules. Let's say the government approves a $2,000 dividend, and they set a phase-out rate of, say, a $50 reduction for every $1,000 you earn over that $75,000 limit. Walk us through a scenario.
Okay, perfect. Let's take an individual whose adjusted gross income is $77,000.
Okay, so just a little over.
It's a little over. That's $2,000 over the $75,000 limit. Under our assumed phase-out rule, $50 per thousand over, you take that $2,000 excess, divide it by 1,000, which gives you 2.
Right.
Then you multiply that 2 by the $50 reduction rate, which equals a $100 reduction.
So instead of getting the full $2,000, that person would get $1,900. It's a slope, not a cliff.
Exactly. Now let's take someone who earns $85,000 AGI.
Okay, a bit higher.
Right. That's $10,000 over the $75,000 limit. So you divide 10,000 by 1,000, which is 10. Multiply that 10 by the $50 reduction rate, and you get a total reduction of $500.
So their payment would be $1,500.
$1,500. It makes the mechanism really clear. You keep getting a portion of the payment until your income hits a much higher secondary cutoff. In this case, it would be an AGI of $115,000, where the $40,000 overage would zero out the $2,000 payment.
And the takeaway for the fixed income community here remains the same.
Absolutely. For the vast majority of people relying only on fixed income, this phase-out is not a concern whatsoever.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're having to worry about hitting $75,000 or $100,000 in AGI, you are already in a very fortunate minority among fixed income beneficiaries.
So, to summarize this section, forget about tax filing, forget about working status, focus only on your AGI. If you're well under that likely $75,000 to $100,000 range, you should be included based on all historical precedent and what's been said so far.
Exactly. But now we do need to discuss the gotchas.
Right.
These are the specific conditions that historically have made recipients ineligible or resulted in the payment being offset. And offset just means the government legally keeps the money to settle a debt. This is essential information because these factors can severely impact some recipients.
Let's start with the big one debt that you owe directly to the federal government, back taxes.
Yes. If a recipient owes back taxes to the federal government can and very likely will, exercise its right to keep the funds from this dividend payment and apply them against that outstanding tax liability.
This is called a federal offset.
It is, and it's standard procedure for federal payouts that are administered through the Treasury Department. It's important to understand this isn't some kind of surprise attack. If you owe the government, they often collect before they cut you a check.
That's a really crucial nuance. It'll only impact a smaller subset of the population, but it's a clear warning for those it does affect.
What was the second major federal offset we saw during the last distributions?
Past due child support. During the previous stimulus check distributions, the law allowed for individuals with outstanding past due child support obligations to have those checks offset.
So the money was taken.
The money was taken and then redirected to the custodial parent or the appropriate state agency to cover that owed support.
So these two federal offsets back taxes and past due child support are the two major historical pitfalls that we really need to watch out for. Right. And while they don't impact the majority of beneficiaries, they are key nuances, and they often cause a lot of heartbreak for those who are expecting the money, only to find out it was intercepted.
Okay, so now we have to step into the critical area of protections. Since the specific legal language for this dividend isn't finalized yet, we have to talk about what Congress usually does for relief payments to this specific fixed income population.
We're talking about protection from private debt garnishment and clarification of taxability.
And this is maybe the most critical financial protection detail for low-income beneficiaries. We need two major confirmations, right?
Two, first, will the payment be considered taxable income? And second, and maybe even more importantly, will it be protected from garnishment by private debt collectors?
Let's start with garnishment. In past relief efforts, especially those aimed at vulnerable populations, Congress has often made sure the payments were shielded from garnishment. Why is that protection so vitally important for someone on Social Security or SSI who might have, say, medical or credit card debt?
Because if the payment is not explicitly protected by the final legislation, a private debt collector could legally seize those funds the second they hit the recipient's bank account.
Wow.
There are critical laws, like 42 U.S.C. Section 407, that protect most Social Security and SSI payments from garnishment. But this new dividend, since it's from tariff revenue, it might be seen as a separate type of federal benefit. It has to be explicitly protected in the new law.
So if that $2,000 lands in an account unprotected and the recipient owes, say, $5,000 in old credit card debt, the bank could potentially just freeze or seize that money.
They could. And the entire intention of providing breathing room and dignity is just completely undermined if the funds end up in a debt collector's hands.
It defeats the whole purpose.
Absolutely. The legislation must include specific language stating that this $2,000 plus dividend is exempt from the claims of creditors. We have to monitor this very closely.
And what about taxability?
We need clarity there, too. Previous stimulus payments were tax-free. They were essentially a refundable tax credit. We expect the same treatment for this dividend to maximize its benefit, but it has to be confirmed.
Okay, now let's move to perhaps the single greatest source of anxiety for our SSI and means-tested audience: how this payment interacts with other programs.
Like SNAP, Medicaid, or housing assistance, yes.
This is a critical detail that's completely missing right now, and the lack of clarity, it poses an immediate threat to the eligibility of the most vulnerable recipients.
We're talking specifically about means-tested programs, which are defined by very strict limits on both your income and your resources, meaning your assets.
Can you define means-tested programs and explain the specific crisis a $2,000 payment could create for someone in them?
Sure. Means-tested programs include Supplemental Security Income, or SSI, SNAP, which is food stamps, certain Medicaid benefits, and housing assistance. For SSI, for example, the resource limit, the amount of money or assets you can have in the bank, is often only $2,000 for an individual.
Wait a minute. So if someone on SSI currently has, say, $1,500 in their bank account and they get this $2,000 dividend,
They are instantly at $3,500 in resources.
so they are now over the $2,000 resource limit.
Precisely. And that temporary increase could, in theory, immediately jeopardize their eligibility for SSI.
Yeah.
And losing SSI usually means losing your Medicaid coverage, too.
That is a catastrophic scenario, receiving a $2,000 dividend only to lose your essential health care or food benefits.
It's the worst-case scenario.
So what's the historical solution? What has Congress done in the past to protect this population?
They include specific language in the relief bill, language that states the payment does not count as income or as a resource for the purposes of these means-tested programs for a specific period of time,
How long?
usually 12 months. It's known as an exclusion period. This 12-month grace period allows the recipient to spend the money on immediate needs, bills, food, medicine, without being penalized by the stringent asset tests of SSI or SNAP.
This detail feels non-negotiable. If that 12-month exclusion period isn't in the final legislation, this dividend could cause way more harm than good for the lowest income recipients.
It is the single most important safety net provision we are looking for in the final text. We need confirmation that the payment will be tax-free, protected from garnishment, and excluded from resource calculations for means-tested benefits.
So we have two major logistical worries based on historical patterns that lawmakers must provide clarity on before this money is sent out. We've established eligibility is broad, but the protections are still pretty hazy.
They are, and we have provided a lot of solid answers based on precedent and the source language, but we have to be completely transparent about the outstanding unknowns. This situation is fluid, and certain key elements are still being debated or defined.
And the single most important unknown right now is the official final definition of high income for this specific proposal.
That's the one.
We've used that historical $75,000 individual AGI threshold as our best guide, but the final legislation, when it's written and passed, that's what will define the true cutoff.
And that definition is everything. If, for example, due to political pressure from groups advocating for lower-income Americans, they set the threshold even lower, say, $50,000.
That would change things?
It dramatically changes who's included, although it would still largely encompass the fixed-income community. Conversely, if they raise it to $125,000, far more middle-income people would be included. We're just waiting for lawmakers to give us that specific financial detail.
And it's important to acknowledge the reality of the legislative process. I mean, information is changing daily. We are currently waiting for lawmakers to provide all these specific details.
Official income thresholds, potential payment dates.
Right. Will they use birth dates like Social Security does? Will they just lump it all together?
And the specific language addressing the protections and the offsets we just talked about.
We're really in the policy development phase of this potential payment. We know the proposal exists. We know the source of the funding is tariffs, and we know the general intent is to include everyone except high earners.
But the regulatory plumbing, the how and when of it all, is still being finalized.
Let's try to position this potential payment within the broader context of, advocacy for fixed-income individuals. This audience doesn't just need one-time checks. They need long-term stability and structural reform.
That's the bigger picture, absolutely. Is this potential $2,000 plus dividend just a one-time fix to address the current inflation crisis? Or is it part of a bigger push for more permanent structural change?
You mean like the cost of living adjustment?
Exactly. Advocacy groups have been putting sustained pressure on Congress to address issues like the insufficient COLA formula.
Because that calculation often fails to capture the true inflation that seniors experience, right? Especially the steep rise in medical and housing costs.
It does. A $2,000 check provides temporary relief, which is wonderful, but it doesn't fix the underlying problem of inadequate annual adjustments.
So this is breathing room.
It's breathing room, yes. But we need systemic changes, too. And the economic reasoning behind this dividend, tying it to tariff revenues, is a very distinct policy move. It's aimed at community relief, distributing wealth collected via trade policy. But it remains to be seen if this signals a real commitment to long-term reforms that permanently improve the dignity and financial stability of fixed-income Americans.
Okay, before we wrap up with our final summary, we have a crucial, very high-stakes warning that we have to deliver. This is absolutely essential for every single person receiving Social Security, SSI, SSDI, or VA benefits.
Because every time a major payment is announced, the scammers target this group first.
Immediately.
We have to strongly warn the audience about potential scams. The second that news of this dividend becomes more solid, the scammers will just flood phone lines and email inboxes. They prey specifically on the vulnerable, on older adults, and on those who are desperate for the money.
This is your absolute protection. The Social Security Administration, the IRS, and the VA will never call you, text you, or email you asking for money, for gift cards, or for personal information related to receiving this payment.
They will never ever tell you that you need to pay a processing fee or an enrollment fee
Yeah.
to get your $2,000.
Remember the old stimulus scams? The phone calls claiming you needed to verify your bank account details.
Or demanding you go out and purchase gift cards to pay some non-existent administrative charge.
If you get a call, a text, or an email claiming to be about this dividend, and they're asking for your social security number or your bank details over the phone,
It is a scam, 100% of the time. Hang up immediately, delete the message, and rely only on official letters sent through the physical mail or on verified government websites. You have to protect your identity and your money.
Okay, that brings us to the summary of this comprehensive deep dive. We've covered a tremendous amount of ground. We've hopefully alleviated some anxiety about basic eligibility, but also highlighted the critical unknowns that are still out there.
Let's reinforce the most important facts we discussed today, the non-negotiables. First, the potential payment amount is substantial, $2,000 or more. This is real money being discussed.
Second, eligibility is broad. Based on the language of everyone and not high-income people, Social Security, SSI, SSDI, and VA beneficiaries should absolutely be included as long as their income is under that likely $75,000 to $100,000 individual AGI threshold.
Third, pay close attention to those two key federal offsets we identified. If you owe back taxes to the federal government, or if you have past due child support obligations, your payment may be intercepted before it ever reaches you.
And fourth, the urgent need for clarity on protections. We are still waiting for that official definition of high income, as well as confirmation on critical safeguards for garnishment, and most importantly for our most vulnerable listeners, that 12-month exclusion from means-tested benefits like SSI and SNAP.
We understand that these potential payments can be life-changing. They offer much-needed breathing room to cover utilities, medical costs, overdue rent. We are committed to being your trusted guide, breaking down all this technical language into clear, actionable, and empathetic information every single step of the way.
Now for our final provocative closing thought. This entire payment, as we've said, is tied to tariff revenues. It's tied to international trade policy, not traditional domestic spending.
So if the funding mechanism for widespread community relief is now structurally tied to trade revenue, what does that imply about future payments? Does this create an entirely new stream of economic relief, one that's tied to global trade policy?
And would that make these payments more frequent, less dependent on those contentious domestic appropriations debates?
It's a fascinating precedent. It could fundamentally change how we think about economic policy and wealth distribution in the U.S.
Absolutely. And the situation is dynamic. It is changing daily. The second that details like official dates and finalized income thresholds hit the wire, we will be right here to update you immediately. We strongly encourage you to subscribe and turn on your notifications so you never miss a crucial financial update.
And please, share this deep dive with family or friends who are also relying on these fixed benefits. We appreciate your trust, and we'll be here for you every step of the way, providing clarity.
If you're watching this, you know how precarious things feel right now. For so many Americans, especially if you're relying on a fixed income, on Social Security, SSI, SSDI, or VA benefits, every single dollar matters.
It really does.
And that is exactly why we need to focus on a major financial commitment that has, it's basically dominated the headlines for the last few days.
Yeah.
We're talking about a potential $2,000 payment promised directly to the American public. And this isn't just a rumor.
No, not at all. The commitment has been unprecedented in its coordination. We've heard it publicly, repeatedly, from the president, the Treasury Secretary, the chief economic advisors.
All of them.
All of them affirming their dedication to delivering this specific $2,000 payment.
They've put the number right there on the table and basically dared Congress to stop it.
Yeah.
We've gathered 5 specific verifiable pieces of evidence, official statements, clips, direct presidential posts that not only confirm this push, but also, they start to reveal the proposed funding and who they're targeting.
And that level of public unified commitment, it dramatically increases the political stakes. For you, if your budget is already stretched thin, understanding the reality behind this promise is it's crucial. When the entire economic team publicly says this money is coming, it generates hope.
Right.
And the administration will face, an intense political backlash if they fail to deliver. So our mission today is to cut through the noise and really analyze the fiscal and political viability of this payment.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our listener today, and really a huge part of our audience, is focused squarely on financial stability. the ability to pay the rent, cover medical costs, just maintain dignity in retirement.
Mm.
So when a figure like $2,000 is thrown out there by the White House, it stops being some political talking point
Yeah.
and it starts being a lifeline. Today, we are focusing purely on this recent, highly concentrated commitment from the administration.
And the goal here is precision.
Okay.
We're not interested in the hypotheticals of if the government might send money. We are analyzing the specific, recent evidence that proves the administration's active, serious intent to legislate this payment into existence, and to do it now. It moves the whole conversation from speculation to, well, to logistics.
We're looking for the concrete data points. And the first point of discussion has to be a language itself, because it tells us so much about the policy's intent.
Absolutely. When you have multiple high-ranking individuals echoing the exact same commitment and using the same unique terminology dividend, it signals a strong, coordinated strategy. We really need to examine that distinction before we even look at the evidence for the funding.
Okay, so let's start there. The president has been, I'd say, meticulous about his language. He refers to this as a $2,000 stimulus check or dividend payment.
Right.
But then he specifies the preferred mechanism, stating he wants at least $2,000 in the form of a dividend to everybody except high-income people. That shift in terminology feels very, very deliberate.
It is. It is the heart of the administration's fiscal narrative for this payment. A traditional stimulus check is, it's generally understood to be deficit spending.
Money they have to borrow or print?
Exactly. Money borrowed or printed to inject liquidity into the economy quickly. A dividend, in this context, suggests something completely different. It suggests a distribution of accrued, existing government revenue, which is typically linked to a specific source of income.
Which, in this case, they're saying is tariffs.
In this case, it's tariffs.
So by framing it as a dividend, what they're really trying to do is preemptively neutralize that criticism that this is just adding to the national debt. Is that right?
Precisely. It attempts to reframe the payment as a financial return to citizens from money already collected through trade duties. And that has massive political utility.
Okay, but it's more than just politics, isn't it? I mean, the term dividend could carry specific legal and tax implications.
It could, and those details are still being worked out by the economic advisors. For instance, sometimes dividends from government-managed funds are treated differently for tax purposes than, say, general income or an emergency stimulus.
Potentially making it tax-free.
Potentially. Or altering how it interacts with eligibility for other means-tested benefits, which is a major, major concern for our audience on SSI or Medicaid.
That's a critical point for our listeners, especially if you're on SSI, SSDI, or housing assistance, where a sudden influx of what looks like taxable income can jeopardize your ongoing eligibility for vital aid. So the wording choices here matter deeply.
They do. And the president's phrasing, to everybody except high-income people, it just underscores the intent to make this a broad-based measure. It's aimed squarely at middle-class, working, and fixed-income Americans.
It defines the goal by exclusion, promising universality up to a certain point.
Exactly.
But we have to anchor this discussion back to reality. This is not yet money in the bank.
Absolutely not. As the administration's chief economic advisor, Kevin Hassett, he explicitly confirmed this. He said this money will require legislation, and that is the highest hurdle.
It's everything, really.
It's everything. It cannot be enacted via a simple presidential memorandum or an executive order. Congress must draft, debate, and pass a law authorizing the appropriation of this specific tariff revenue and establishing all the rules for its distribution.
So despite all the public enthusiasm, the final decision rests on Capitol Hill, in the hands of lawmakers who are, let's be honest, often hesitant to pass broad, expensive measures.
Which is why the administration's coordinated pressure is so telling. They are trying to make it politically impossible for Congress to say no.
They're strategically leveraging public demand.
And the 5 data points we are about to discuss, they serve as the foundation of that political leverage. They're committing the administration so deeply that failure to deliver would just be politically disastrous.
This is where the political messaging meets the policy planning. The administration hasn't just mentioned this idea in passing. They have saturated the media landscape with the identical message, all within about a 72-hour period.
Yeah, it's been a full-court press.
This strategy of painting themselves into an extremely tight corner, as one source observed, it just suggests total institutional buy-in.
It's a very high-stakes move.
Yeah.
For the audience relying on financial predictability, this signals that the promise has passed the initial, vetting stage and is now in active development. We have to scrutinize the statements of the people doing the groundwork.
Okay, so let's start with the economic gatekeeper, the man who provided the financial justification for this entire proposal.
Right.
Economic advisor Kevin Hassett.
Kevin Hassett is the economic advisor. He's the person responsible for crunching the numbers and confirming feasibility.
His statement was pivotal because it provided that financial anchor for the dividend narrative. So what did he specifically claim regarding the funding?
Hassett asserted that the current influx of tariff revenue has created, and this is a quote, enough room to cover those checks and not go into the rest of the budget.
Okay, that is a profoundly important claim.
It is.
If that's accepted, it shifts the entire debate from being about deficit spending to one of revenue distribution.
Completely.
Okay, let's unpack that fiscal narrative. Hassett is essentially claiming that the money derived from import duties, from tariffs, is sufficient and separable from the general federal budget pool, allowing it to be returned to the people without affecting, say, existing Social Security funding or military spending.
Yes, and this relies on a specific accounting argument. While all federal revenue generally goes to the U.S. Treasury's general fund, the administration is arguing that the source of the revenue, the tariffs, can be earmarked for redistribution as a dividend. Hassett confirmed they have enough money in the current stream to fund the full $2,000 checks.
And he also confirmed he's working on it now, right?
He did. He confirmed that he is actively studying the matter and getting the numbers straight so the president has all the choices he needs, which proves the proposal is in a technical analysis phase, not just some talking point.
But here's where we need to stop being recorders and start being analysts. Our sources noted a significant internal contradiction. While Hassett claims the funding works, there was an internal note suggesting that the numbers that we're calculating on a year-over-year basis, it doesn't really make sense. So what does that contradiction tell us? Is this tariff funding a sound economic solution, or is it just a political justification?
That internal tension is the most fascinating part of the data. Look, tariff revenue is inherently volatile.
Of course.
It fluctuates based on global trade volumes, trade war dynamics, specific tariff rates. To rely on it for a massive fixed one-time payment of $2,000 per person is, well, it's fiscally questionable over the long term or even year to year.
So the internal skepticism makes sense.
It does. It suggests that while they may have a large cash reserve right now due to recent tariff policies, projecting that revenue consistently is very difficult. Therefore, Hassett's public statement is arguably more of a political assurance, saying we found the money, don't worry about the debt, than a pure reflection of long-term fiscal stability.
Yeah.
So the political fact is that the chief economic advisor has given the green light, regardless of the nuanced economic reality. For the administration, that public assurance is enough to justify the next step, defining who gets the money.
Yeah.
Exactly. Which brings us to evidence number 2, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent.
Right. Next, we had the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, who would be the person to oversee the actual distribution. He confirmed the commitment, and he gave us the first specific figure regarding eligibility.
Bessent provided a tentative eligibility idea when he was discussing who would receive the rebate. He mentioned it would be for families making less than, say, $100,000.
Okay, now for our audience, that $100,000 figure is crucial.
It is.
Because it provides a clear indication of where they intend to draw the line. It confirms they are targeting the vast majority of households, specifically fixed income and middle-class earners, while excluding the highest earners.
But we do have to be careful here. Bessent clarified that this $100,000 was merely a figure in discussion, and that no final threshold has been decided upon yet.
So it's not set in stone?
Not at all. Previous stimulus checks have used varying thresholds, sometimes based on adjusted gross income, sometimes on modified AGI, and they often phase out the benefit above that line rather than just cutting it off abruptly.
Right, a gradual reduction.
Exactly. But the fact that they are discussing a cap around this figure confirms that the definition of high-income people is being quantified right now, and it's likely aligning with thresholds used in prior relief efforts, just to simplify the rollout.
This discussion of an income cap is, I think, particularly reassuring for anyone on Social Security or disability, because it signals that if you weren't considered high income under prior relief efforts, you're likely the exact demographic this dividend is intended to support.
That's the takeaway. The commitment is broad, aiming for maximum impact on people who need financial breathing room, which is so often our fixed income audience. Okay, let's move to the messaging front. Evidence 3. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. Her statement confirmed the active process that's underway. She stated clearly that the White House is, quote, committed to making that happen. Yes.
Levitt's contribution was essential because it laid out the logistical commitment. She confirmed they are currently exploring all legal options to get that done.
Which corroborates Hassett's work.
It does. They are actively researching the best legal vehicle to move the tariff money to the American people.
She did have to temper the expectations a little bit on the timeline, noting that no timeline or further details are available yet.
But the overall message was one of relentless dedication. And this confirms the sequencing we're seeing. Commitment first, then technical analysis, then legislative action. For the public, knowing that the White House press secretary is confirming the active exploring of legal options is powerful evidence that this is not some shelved idea, but a live proposal. And then finally, evidence 4 and 5, the commitment was cemented directly by the president himself on his public platforms. This is what transformed the statement from an interview, quote, into an undeniable public promise.
The use of Truth Social to reinforce the promise, twice within just a few days, on a Sunday and then again on Monday, that is a classic political tactic. It's designed to lock in the public narrative and prevent the message from being diluted by other news cycles. And the repeated phrasing was precise and identical. The distribution of at least $2,000 in the form of a dividend to everybody except high-income people will be paid. That verb choice, will be paid, is so definitive. It is. This repetition, coupled with the specificity of the amount and the mechanism, provides the clearest possible evidence of political intent. Together, these 5 data points demonstrate a singular focus across the administration.
The message is clear.
The $2,000 payment is a top priority that is now past the point of casual discussion. They've made the commitment, now they have to deliver. Now that we've established the commitment is real, we have to deal with the inevitable hurdles, starting with eligibility and the legislative process itself. The core intention is clear. Target everyone who is not high income. And the administration's broad language means that once that specific income threshold is finalized, and it's likely around that $100,000 family AGI discussion point, most beneficiaries of Social Security, SSI, SSDI, and VA benefits will almost certainly qualify.
Yeah.
These fixed income groups are precisely the people who need this financial support most and who would not be captured by any high-income exclusion.
But the mechanism, that remains the critical constraint. Since Hassett confirmed this relies on tariff revenue and requires legislation, we are looking at Congress. What does require legislation actually entail in this scenario? I mean, this is crucial for understanding the timeline.
This is where the deep dive really starts. When a major financial distribution is proposed, Congress has several options, and the choice they make matters significantly for timing.
So what are the most likely paths here?
Well, the first is a standalone bill, passed through regular order. This is typically slow, it's vulnerable to amendments, and it requires bipartisan support to clear procedural hurdles.
Which is hard to get.
Very. Given the size and nature of this payment, a standalone bill could take months or even fail entirely due to political deadlock.
And the alternative? What's the faster route?
The more streamlined path, which I'm sure they're exploring, is budget reconciliation. Reconciliation allows Congress to pass certain measures related to spending, revenues, and the federal debt limit with a simple majority.
Bypassing the filibuster.
Bypassing the usual threat of a filibuster. If the administration can successfully frame this as a revenue distribution measure linked to the collection of tariff duties, they might attempt to use reconciliation.
But that's not a guarantee.
No, it's not. Reconciliation has very strict rules regarding what is permissible, and whether a direct dividend payment qualifies under those rules, well, that would be subject to intense Senate scrutiny.
So the complexity of the legislative path means this is far from a slam dunk. Yet our sources suggest lawmakers are reportedly warming up to the idea of these $2,000 payments. Why the sudden warmth?
There are 2 main drivers, I think. First, the political pressure generated by the White House's public commitment is immense. Lawmakers know that voting against a measure that provides $2,000 to their constituents,
Right.
especially if the funding is publicly claimed to be separate from the debt, that's a difficult electoral decision to make.
And the second driver?
The second is that there may be internal legislative compromises at play. To get the necessary votes, the administration might be bundling this payment with other legislative priorities, or perhaps adjusting the eligibility criteria slightly to appease specific factions within Congress. The fact that the initial rejection we often see with massive spending proposals is absent suggests that strategic groundwork is already being laid.
It really seems the economic viability, dubious as it might be over the long term, is being overshadowed by political necessity. The narrative of returning tariff money to the people is proving highly effective in lowering congressional resistance.
That narrative is the key. It allows budget hawks to conceptually support the measure as a redistribution of collected revenue rather than approval of new debt. This subtle shift in framing is likely the reason for the reported warming up. The speed at which this moves now depends entirely on the legal team's success in defining a legislative vehicle, like a reconciliation bill, that can pass quickly.
Okay, let's transition to the practical implications. This is where this deep dive becomes most relevant for our audience. What does this strong commitment mean for the likelihood of the money actually arriving? And critically, how will it affect existing benefits?
The repeated public commitment is a massive factor. They are in a high-risk situation. If the administration, after the president posted this twice, and his top 3 financial officials confirmed it, if they failed to deliver, the resulting political blowback would be catastrophic.
So that risk works in the listener's favor.
In a way, yes. That inherent risk actually serves as a guarantor for you, the listener. The internal motivation to succeed is now maximized.
Let's dive deeper into the financial complexities, specifically Hassett's tariff funding claim. If the money is coming from tariffs, does that genuinely make it fiscally sound?
This is where we have to maintain that critical distance. Hassett's assertion that the revenue exists and will not require digging into the existing federal budget is the administration's public line. However, that contradiction we noted in the sources, the year-over-year accounting challenge, it suggests that this funding source may not be sustainable or stable. If Congress passes this bill based on the tariff revenue, and that revenue suddenly dips, they will either have to cut the amount of the payment, delay future payments, or ultimately fund the difference through conventional means, like debt.
So for the listener, the confidence of the economic advisor provides a legislative justification, but the long-term solvency of the mechanism is, it's secondary to the immediate political goal of distribution.
That's a good way to put it.
No.
Okay, let's assume, for the sake of the audience, that the legislation passes and the $2,000 payment arrives. We have to address the most pressing concerns for our fixed-income and low-income audience: taxes, other benefits, and scams. These are crucial concerns that must be addressed, even without the final legislative text.
Starting with taxability. If it's labeled a dividend from tariff revenue, does that protect it from being taxed?
It offers a possibility, but it's not a guarantee. Past stimulus checks generally have been non-taxable income because they were structured as refundable tax credits.
Okay.
If this payment is structured purely as a dividend distribution, its tax treatment would depend entirely on the specific language in the final bill. We would strongly advise our audience to assume, just for planning purposes, that the funds could be considered taxable until Congress explicitly declares them tax-free.
But for most of our audience whose incomes are low, any tax liability would probably be minimal, right?
It would likely be minimal or offset by other credits, yes.
A far more urgent concern for those on means-tested benefits like supplemental security income, SSI, SNAP food assistance, or Medicaid is the impact on their eligibility. Can a $2,000 payment jeopardize that vital aid?
Historically, Congress has been very protective of these benefits during relief efforts. During prior stimulus rounds, the money was specifically excluded from counting as income or resources for a 12-month period for SSI and other federal means-tested programs.
And that protection is absolutely vital.
It is. If Congress fails to include this exemption in the new legislation, a $2,000 lump sum could push an SSI recipient over the $2,000 asset limit, causing them to lose benefits. Given the political focus on low-income Americans, we expect and frankly advocate for Congress to include these explicit protections to safeguard eligibility for ongoing benefits.
And what about garnishment? Can debt collectors or outstanding judgments seize this money upon arrival?
This is another area where the final legislation must be explicit. For the payment to be safe, the bill needs to include garnishment protection, declaring the funds exempt from legal processes that would attach them to satisfied debts.
We've seen that protection before.
We have, but listeners must monitor the final bill. If you are concerned, you should deposit the money into a protected account as quickly as possible. And finally, let's address the inevitable dark side of financial news scams. This is a highly vulnerable audience. This is perhaps the most important guidance we can offer today. The administration has provided strong evidence of its intent, but the details are still pending. Therefore, listeners should anticipate a massive wave of fraud attempts. The official channels, the IRS, the SSA, or the VA will never call, text, or email you asking for money, banking information, or personal data to process your $2,000 dividend. The distribution of federal funds almost always relies on information the government already has on file.
So what should you do if you receive a suspicious communication?
You should hang up immediately, delete the text or email, and report it to the appropriate agency. Trust only official letters sent via mail or verified government websites ending in te.gov. No legitimate entity needs payment or sensitive information to send you money you are already entitled to receive.
We've established the commitment is strong and the need for protections is high. But when can people expect to see this money? What are the next concrete steps we should be monitoring? Because the administration is still exploring all legal options, we lack those crucial definitive details. A final income threshold, a definitive timeline, and the specific distribution plan. The timeline is just inextricably linked to the legislative path chosen. If Congress chooses the slower, regular standalone bill path, we could be looking at many months. If they successfully use a mechanism like budget reconciliation, the timeline could shrink dramatically.
Correct. The most important thing listeners can do is monitor the movement of the legislative proposal in Congress. Look for official announcements regarding the introduction of a bill number in committee discussions. That will be the primary indicator that the wheels are truly turning.
And what about the administration? They promised an update once the economic advisors finish their work?
Yes. Watch for a joint announcement from the White House and the Treasury Department. That update will likely contain the finalized income threshold, the process of distribution, direct deposit, paper checks, direct express cards, and an estimated timeline based on congressional cooperation.
And they'll need to detail how the SSA and VA will coordinate to get the money out.
Exactly. How they will coordinate with the Treasury to get the money to existing beneficiaries quickly and correctly.
In the past, these payments have often been tied to a beneficiary's birthday for staggered distribution. Should listeners expect similar administrative complexity this time?
Likely, yes. The distribution will leverage existing infrastructure. For current Social Security and SSI recipients, the Treasury will rely on the payment files maintained by the Social Security Administration. If the payment is a one-time event, they will likely adopt a staggered schedule based on either the benefit received, so SSI first, then Social Security, or the recipient's birth date, as a means of managing the massive volume of payments and ensuring the system doesn't overload.
So the best preparatory step is just to make sure your info is up to date.
Maintaining up-to-date information in the My Social Security portal is the best preparatory step you can take right now. So the guidance remains. Manage expectations. Understand the commitment is genuine, but action is still pending, and prioritize safety against scams above all else.
Exactly. The commitment is a political reality. The delivery is a legislative logistic. Do not plan your budget around receiving this money immediately, but recognize that the likelihood of passage is extremely high given the political pressure the administration has created for itself. Wait for the concrete legislative text before making any financial decisions based on this proposed dividend.
This has been a crucial deep dive into a promise that could provide significant financial breathing room for millions of Americans, especially those who rely on fixed incomes and struggle against rising costs. Let's summarize the key takeaways. The evidence for the $2,000 payment is undeniable. 5 high-profile officials have publicly confirmed the administration's commitment, and the payment is framed as a dividend funded by tariff revenue, a fiscal narrative that's been confirmed by the economic advisor.
The mechanism requires Congress to act, and while legislative movement is possible, the speed depends on the choice of legislative vehicle, such as a standalone bill versus budget reconciliation. For you, the promise of a $2,000 influx means potential relief from mounting bills. And the critical conditions for our audience are twofold. The final legislation must explicitly exclude this payment from income calculations for means-tested benefits like SSI, and it must provide garnishment protections. And we strongly advise constant vigilance against scams targeting this specific promise. This political commitment is designed to be a significant measure of support for those needing financial help the most. The administration has made its intent clear.
And that leads us to our final thought for you to consider. Given that the administration has committed itself so publicly to this tariff funding narrative, and knowing the internal accounting challenges, what specific legislative concessions, beyond just the $100,000 income threshold, do you anticipate Congress demanding in exchange for swift approval of this highly publicized payment?
The clock is ticking, the pressure is building, and the details are about to matter immensely. We encourage you to keep following these updates closely as the administration works to fulfill this very public, potentially life-changing promise. Thank you for diving.
Let's unpack this. We are looking at one of the most high-stakes financial dramas of the year, really.
Oh, absolutely.
And it involves a potential lifeline for millions of low-income Americans and retirees. So we are diving deep right now into this projected $2,000 one-time financial payment that the administration has been, consistently promising.
And we really can't stress this enough.
Yeah.
This is far beyond just, political talk.
Right.
This is a real discussion. It's happening at the absolute highest levels of government, and it's specifically tied to these new emergency tariff revenues.
Okay.
But the clock is just ticking on an immediate, very high-stakes crisis, which is that the entire funding source for this payment,
The whole thing.
it's dependent on an imminent Supreme Court ruling. We expect it to drop any day now,
Right.
and it could either secure this funding instantly or just completely eliminate it.
And that's the tension, isn't it? That's what makes this deep dive so urgent today. Our mission is to explain precisely who might qualify, the minimum cost of this distribution, which, by the way, starts at a staggering $272 billion.
Just staggering.
And crucially, the one piece of information you really need to know: why the administration insists this $2,000 is still coming, even if the Supreme Court strikes down their current funding mechanism. This is the financial breeding room so many of you are waiting for. So let's unpack the reality behind this massive promise and give you the facts you need.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission today is, well, it's focused and it's critical. We are discussing the potential $2,000 financial transfer. Some people call it a stimulus check, others a dividend payment or a tariff rebate. For millions of you relying on fixed incomes, whether that's through Social Security retirement benefits, Social Security disability insurance, or supplemental security income.
Right, SSDI and SSI.
Exactly. This $2,000, it represents substantial, maybe even life-altering relief.
It represents dignity, frankly.
Yeah. When you're budgeting month to month, managing inflation that just eats away at the value of your benefits, a one-time payment of this size. I mean, it can mean the difference between paying a critical utility bill, replacing a broken appliance, or just buying groceries without stress.
Of course.
We understand the stress that's tied to this figure, and that stress is just amplified because this payment is caught in a legal crossfire. The core conflict, and we have to define this right up front, is that the payment is explicitly tied to revenue streams the administration is currently generating through these emergency tariffs.
And the president has repeatedly reinforced that connection, hasn't he?
Over and over.
So if the commitment is to pay a large dividend from a specific source of income, and the legality of that income stream is currently being challenged at the highest judicial level, you just have a deep, inherent conflict between a political promise and legal uncertainty.
Which is why our goal here has to be absolute precision. We need to go beyond the media sound bites and really just extract the verifiable facts from all the political speculation. We have to focus on two things at once. The financial feasibility, is the money there now or will it only be there later? And the severe, immediate legal implications of this imminent Supreme Court decision.
Right.
For those of you who are watching every penny and genuinely stressing over whether this $2,000 will materialize, this deep dive is essential. It's urgent financial guidance. We want to ground your hopes and your planning in the facts we can actually verify.
That said, let's start with the money itself. The proposal, the sheer scale of it, and the fundamental question of where the administration says this $2,000 is coming from. When we talk about this money, the terminology really matters.
It does.
Well, pretty much everyone calls it a stimulus check, which is, the easy vernacular that's stuck from previous emergency aid years. The administration has been very intentional about clarifying the language.
Very.
They call it a $2,000 dividend payment or a tariff rebate distribution.
And that distinction is crucial because it immediately defines the proposed funding source.
Yeah, how so?
Well, this isn't framed as deficit spending, and it's not emergency aid authorized by Congress. It is framed by the administration as a direct distribution or a rebate of money that's already been collected by the Treasury through duties on imports, which they call tariffs.
So the message is, we're giving the revenue back to the people who are struggling.
Exactly. That's the narrative.
So if the payment is justified by that revenue stream, we have to understand the massive financial magnitude of these tariffs. I mean, the administration is using some absolutely staggering numbers to try and justify not just the immediate payment, but the long-term feasibility of this whole dividend concept.
Let's start with the current collected revenue, which is significant. As of the very end of 2025, which is our current time frame for this deep dive, the government has collected approximately $261 billion in tariff revenue.
This year alone.
This year alone. It's a colossal amount of money by any measure.
Okay, $261 billion is certainly a huge pile of cash, but the administration is also trying to paint a picture of, enduring fiscal stability for this program. They aren't just looking at the present, are they?
No, not at all. They are looking far ahead, and that's really the key to their justification. The official reports and the statistics cited by the administration project that the government could bring in anywhere between $3 trillion and $4 trillion in total tariff revenue over the next 10 years.
Wow.
This massive future projection is the cornerstone of their argument. They're essentially arguing that over a decade, this revenue stream is robust enough to absolutely handle the cost of a substantial dividend, making it fiscally responsible and, sustainable.
Okay, let's inject some critical analysis right here, because this is where the financial pressure becomes really intense. We have to compare those massive revenue projections, that $3 to $4 trillion future bucket, with the projected cost of the payment today.
Yes.
What are the actual numbers required for this $2,000 dividend?
Well, the cost estimates for the $2,000 payment have, an alarmingly wide range.
Okay.
And that immediately signals the underlying uncertainty about who is actually eligible, which is a topic we'll cover in depth next. But on the low end of the estimate, the distribution is projected to cost approximately $272 billion.
$272 billion.
Right. However, if the eligibility criteria are set wide, those projections soar up to over $600 billion.
Over $600 billion. That's a massive figure, nearly a quarter of the entire federal budget in some recent years. But let's just focus tightly on that low-end number, $272 billion. When we place that minimum required cost next to the current revenue collected, the $261 billion, we immediately identify a pretty significant financial pressure point.
A huge one.
An inherent funding gap, assuming this is a one-time, immediate payout funded solely by this year's collection.
Precisely. If we compare the lowest possible cost estimate of $272 billion against the entire amount collected so far this year, that critical $261 billion, we see that the minimum required cost already exceeds the current collected revenue by about $11 billion.
$11 billion.
It's not a small rounding error. And this immediately raises a very serious question. How is the shortfall going to be covered? I mean, will they engage in short-term borrowing? Will they just delay the payment until the revenue increases? Or does this shortfall force the administration's hand, confirming that this is not intended to be a single immediate $2,000 payment paid out of this year's income, but actually a benefit spread out over time?
That $11 billion shortfall is a concrete obstacle. If the minimum cost already outstrips the current revenue, how does the administration manage to suggest it's entirely feasible to pay it out right now? I've seen some financial analysts call this magical thinking.
They manage it by forcefully pivoting the discussion to the long-term view, that 10-year projection.
Yeah.
If you calculate the distribution cost across an entire decade, looking at that potential $3 to $4 trillion figure, the cost of this entire distribution, even at the high-end estimate of $600 billion, represents only about a 10 to 20% profit share of the total projected revenue.
Right.
So, fiscally speaking, the administration's case hinges on the argument that the payment is contingent on that long-term sustained revenue stream. This suggests that the distribution must be phased over several years, or it assumes the current year's revenue will continue to grow significantly and rapidly to close that $11 billion gap and sustain the subsequent payments.
So the core financial tension is clear. If they frame it as a dividend spread across that 10-year projection, the numbers are manageable.
Yes.
But if the political promise is to get this $2,000 into the hands of low-income Americans now, the numbers collected right now simply don't support it without either deficit spending or, drastically cutting the eligible population.
That's the entire financial reality encapsulated. The current collective revenue does not support the dividend for a huge percentage of the population over a one-year period of time. This crucial detail about the timeline immediate payment versus phased payment is one of the most critical unknowns currently generating immense uncertainty for you, the listener.
That naturally brings us directly to the second massive question. Who actually gets this money?
The big one.
We are now diving into the critical unknowns concerning eligibility and the parameters that define who is included. The fact that the cost range is so immense, from $272 billion up to over $600 billion, is a direct symptom of this eligibility mystery.
Absolutely. The cost projection is wide precisely because the exact income thresholds and the resulting total eligible population are completely unknown. The sheer lack of specific, indicated parameters is what prevents analysts from locking down a firm cost estimate. We know the intended scope is a huge percentage of the population, and we know the target is low-income beneficiaries. But without clear, detailed rules, the cost projection is just an educated guess that spans hundreds of billions of dollars.
And this lack of specificity is incredibly frustrating for our listeners who are relying on specific benefits. I mean, when you're receiving Social Security or perhaps you're on the lower income benefits like SSI or SSDI, you need absolute clarity on whether you are included. What is the administration saying right now about the target demographic?
They have not indicated the specific rules. That is the most important caveat here. They simply state that the total number of people eligible would represent a huge percentage of the population, and they frame it as a rebate to offset the costs of the tariffs themselves. When you are calculating a payment that costs hundreds of billions, you are implicitly talking about reaching tens, potentially hundreds of millions of people.
But we do have one single concrete, though maybe non-committal piece of information about eligibility that was released last month. We have to anchor our discussion there.
That was back in early to mid-November, yes. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent offered the only real suggestion regarding income thresholds. He indicated, tentatively, that incomes under $100,000 might be the ceiling for individual filers.
$100,000 threshold, that sounds pretty generous, but the moment that number was mentioned, it immediately clashed with the financial reality we just discussed. How can they possibly reconcile a high eligibility threshold with the fact that they are already $11 billion short on current revenue for even the minimum distribution?
That's the central political and financial paradox. If you apply a $100,000 income threshold to a huge percentage of the population, you immediately soar toward that $600 billion plus high-end cost projection. That cost is clearly unaffordable based on current annual revenue.
Right.
This forces the hands of the analysts. If the payment is going to be made in a short time frame, the actual threshold for an individual is likely to be significantly less than $100,000. This is a purely arithmetic necessity required to manage those staggering cost projections and keep the payment within the realm of possibility in the short term.
Let's break that pressure point down a little further. If the administration wants to maintain the political optics of the $100,000 threshold, they are essentially confirming they must push the payment timeline out, right? Spreading the $2,000 benefit over 5 or 10 years, making the annual payment much smaller.
Exactly. The timeline and the eligibility threshold are inversely related. If the political goal is to send out $2,000 now, the eligibility threshold must drop significantly, perhaps closer to the national median income, which would exclude many.
Okay.
Conversely, if the political goal is to keep the threshold high, say $100,000, the payment must become a phased distribution. Maybe just $200 a year for 10 years, which would entirely change the nature of the promised relief. This difference between a large immediate lump sum and a small annual dividend is immense for someone living on SSI.
For our audience, many of whom are on fixed incomes like Social Security, SSDI, or SSI, we need to talk about what this payment is intended to do for them specifically.
Yeah.
These benefits inherently place recipients below or near those lower income thresholds.
The intention is clearly to target lower income beneficiaries, using the income threshold as the primary filtering mechanism. So this makes the payment highly relevant for those on fixed incomes. But until the administration indicates the exact income cutoff, we can't confirm which specific groups, like those solely relying on SSI or SSDI, will automatically be included or excluded.
So we're still waiting.
We can only state that the commitment exists to benefit those who need it most, but the specific rules that would make the cost manageable are still missing. They just haven't been indicated.
We must also address the fact that many of our listeners might be working while receiving benefits. For Social Security retirement, there are income limits for those under full retirement age. For SSDI, there are limits on substantial gainful activity, or SGA.
Right.
Would a $2,000 one-time dividend payment count as income for the purposes of these benefit limits?
That is a crucial question concerning financial protections. Generally, if this payment is administered as a tax rebate or a specific non-recurring dividend funded by government duties, it is unlikely to be counted as earned income for SGA purposes for SSDI recipients or as income that affects the Social Security earnings test.
Okay, that's good news.
However, for SSI recipients who have very strict resource and income limits, often referred to as asset tests, we need absolute clarity. A sudden influx of $2,000 could theoretically push some beneficiaries over the limit, although most government rebates are structured to be exempt. The absence of specific rules right now means anyone near the SSI asset limit needs to be cautious, which just reinforces the need for the administration to publish these critical rules immediately.
Let's also define those acronyms clearly for anyone joining us. Social Security Disability Insurance, SSDI, is for those with a work history who are disabled. Supplemental Security Income, SSI, is for those who are aged, blind, or disabled and have very low income and few resources. So the potential for the $2,000 to affect SSI eligibility is a major concern that needs to be definitively addressed when the final rules are published.
It creates a major source of anxiety. The administration needs to publish a clear FAQ that confirms this $2,000 dividend will be fully exempt from means-tested programs like SNT, Medicaid, and especially SSI. Until that happens, it remains a serious unknown for the most vulnerable recipients.
Now, let's pivot to the legal dimension, because everything we've just discussed, the revenue, the cost, the feasibility, the uncertainty, all of it hinges on a legal threat hanging over the entire operation.
Yes.
The imminent Supreme Court ruling.
The urgency of this ruling cannot be overstated. As of this mid-December deep dive, the decision on the legality of the emergency tariffs is expected any day now.
Any day now.
This isn't a ruling coming next year. This is literally any minute or hour. The entire financial ecosystem and the hopes of millions of Americans are just waiting on this announcement.
What exactly is the legal mechanism being challenged here? And what are the constitutional or administrative grounds for the challenge that has the administration so nervous?
The challenge centers on the scope of executive authority. The emergency tariffs were enacted quickly, using specific powers granted to the executive branch related to international trade and national security. The plaintiffs are arguing that the administration overstepped those specific statutory limits and that these duties should have required explicit congressional authorization or followed a more stringent legal process.
I see.
So the core worry is that the Supreme Court will review the entire legal basis of these emergency tariffs and determine that they are not lawful because they exceed the president's delegated authority.
And if the Supreme Court rules against the administration, what happens then?
Well, if the court determines the tariffs are unlawful, the ruling could potentially require the administration to immediately repeal the tariffs, and here's the catastrophic one. It could require that all the money collected so far, that critical $261 billion, must be paid back to the importing entities.
Paid back. So if that $261 billion has to be returned, that would be an instant and catastrophic blow to the entire revenue stream that funds the $2,000 dividend. That's a powerful, immediate financial consequence that would just dominate the news cycle.
It would be an absolute financial meltdown and a political crisis. The moment that ruling drops, if the Supreme Court strikes down the tariffs, the immediate reaction from the media and political opponents will be instantaneous. They will declare the $2,000 dividend dead. They'll argue that the sole funding source has vanished, making the payment impossible, and that the administration is now required to find another $250 billion to refund the previously collected money.
And this fear among everyday people is completely legitimate. I mean, if the revenue source that was promised is suddenly removed and the money has to be returned, the $2,000 payment truly seems impossible on the surface. How can anyone plan for this level of volatility?
It seems impossible based on the immediate figures. That is the logical immediate conclusion for anyone not privy to the administration's strategic planning. There goes the revenue, there goes the plan.
Right.
However, the true deep dive requires us to move beyond that immediate fear and look at the administration's contingency plan, which is where their intense political commitment is most evident.
This strategic pivot is the crucial turn in the narrative, and it explains why the administration remains so outwardly confident. We are moving into the administration's contingency and their, well, their defiant stance against the potential Supreme Court action. What is the key reassurance they are offering, and how is this legal maneuver even possible?
The key reassurance is that the administration is reported to have multiple other avenues or other ways to generate equivalent revenue, even if the Supreme Court strikes down the current tariffs.
So this isn't just blind optimism.
Not at all. This is a plan based on the extensive powers the executive branch holds over trade and duties.
So this is a sophisticated legal and executive maneuver, not just wishful thinking. They are essentially saying, you may strike down the current legal framework, but we will find a different existing legal statute to generate the same income.
Precisely. They would effectively reinstate duties on imports under a different section of trade law or via a different executive action that would not be called tariffs under the specific legal mechanism struck down by the Supreme Court. But the function would be literally the same thing.
The same thing.
A substantial revenue-generating activity designed explicitly to bring money into the Treasury to fund commitments like the $2,000 payment.
Okay, let's elaborate on what the same thing means in practical terms.
Yeah.
What type of executive power or Trade Act provision would allow them to bypass the Supreme Court's immediate ruling and reinstate these duties almost instantly?
Well, while the specific internal memo detailing the plan hasn't been released, analysts point to several major avenues. One possibility is utilizing provisions of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEIEPA, or other specific provisions within existing trade laws that allow the president broad authority to regulate commerce or impose fees to protect domestic industries or address foreign economic practices.
I see.
By simply changing the legislative hook they use to justify the duties, from an emergency tariff to perhaps a countervailing duty or a border adjustment fee based on a different legal statute, they can keep the revenue flowing.
I find this defiant stance fascinating because it speaks to a profound political commitment to this $2,000 payment, particularly as a mechanism to help offset high costs for low-income families.
It is a strong, powerful political commitment. The administration is fully expected to do whatever they possibly can to defy the immediate action of the Supreme Court, assuming the court strikes down the tariffs, and reinstate equivalent duties as quickly as possible. The underlying political calculation is that they cannot afford to look like they failed to deliver a $2,000 payment to their base of fixed income and low-income voters. The message is unequivocal. You told us we can't do it this way. We're going to find another way within our power to restore this revenue stream instantly.
And the ultimate sign of this commitment is the president's own unwavering conviction regarding the payout.
Yes. Based on statements from the administration and the president himself, the president remains absolutely convinced and committed to making the $2,000 payment happen, regardless of what the Supreme Court ruling is. They are still actively assuring the public that these payments are going to happen at some point. The commitment is driven by the political necessity of delivering this relief.
So let's synthesize this crucial takeaway for the learner. The consensus among those analyzing the administration's strategy is that whether the existing tariffs stand or whether they are struck down, the administration fully intends to find a way to recreate the income and ensure the $2,000 payment promise is right back on the table.
Exactly. The revenue source might change names. It might not be called an emergency tariff one day. It will be called a border fee or a duty on imports the next day. But it will be fundamentally the same revenue-generating activity that puts charges on goods imported into the country.
Right.
The administration is prepared to utilize every mechanism in their executive and statutory power to make sure that funding stream is restored almost seamlessly. This piece of knowledge is crucial to counteract the media panic that is sure to ensue if the ruling goes against the current tariff structure.
This moves the conversation from if they can find the money to when will the money be released, which brings us right back to the timeline and the economic feasibility of a quick payout.
Indeed, because even with a restored funding mechanism, the fundamental financial reality remains. The money collected right now is still short of the minimum required for an immediate $2,000 payment for a wide population. The political willpower is there, but the raw cash needed for a lump sum distribution is not.
Let's apply some broader insight and critical thinking to this whole situation, moving beyond the immediate legal drama. We have this official optimism and political commitment colliding head-on with cold external financial analysis regarding the timeline.
That's the conflict in a nutshell. The administration says it's doable. We are committed. But many independent economists and financial analysts are arguing that, as of right now, the numbers currently do not support a $2,000 payment for a huge percentage of the population in a one-year time frame without dipping into the national debt, which runs contrary to the administration's stated funding method.
This forces us to focus once more on the timeline. Does the administration's internal plan fundamentally rely on a massive long-term revenue projection, forcing them to spread the payout over several years?
It almost certainly relies on the long-term view. We keep returning to that point because it is the linchpin of the financial argument.
Right.
While the $261 billion collected so far is substantial, it falls short of the minimum $272 billion required cost. However, if they plan to pay this off over 5 or 10 years, the budget becomes far more manageable. Over a 10-year period, utilizing that $3 to $4 trillion projected revenue, the cost represents a perfectly rational 10 to 20% dividend share.
But the political messaging has been focused on immediate relief. How can the administration pivot to a phased payment, say $200 a year for 10 years, without facing massive backlash from the low-income families and retirees who are expecting a lump sum to pay down debt or cover a large emergency expense?
That is the political calculation they are currently grappling with. The expectation of a $2,000 lump sum is high. If they suddenly announce that the distribution will be spread over a decade, the immediate political benefit will just vanish.
Yeah.
They would be seen as failing to deliver on the original promise. Therefore, the internal tension is whether they risk political capital by drastically lowering the eligibility threshold, perhaps to $40,000 income, to make a quick payment to a smaller group, or if they risk political anger by keeping the threshold high but slowing the payout to a trickle.
Let's consider the mechanics of a phased payment. If the $2,000 is spread over 5 years, that's $400 a year. If it's spread over 10 years, that's $200 a year. For someone on a fixed income, that's still helpful, but it's entirely different than the immediate financial breathing room that $2,000 provides all at once.
It changes the entire utility of the payment.
Completely.
$2,000 can cover a year of medications, or it can replace a broken refrigerator, or it can pay off a high-interest credit card debt. $200 a year is simply another small supplement to a fixed monthly budget. This is why the financial community suspects that any payment delivered soon must come with a heavily restricted eligibility pool.
Regardless of the financial feasibility, the Supreme Court ruling is going to dominate the news cycle. We need to prepare our listeners for the information environment that is coming immediately after that decision drops.
That is essential guidance for anyone worried about their finances. No matter what the ruling is, there will be immediate, strong, and highly conflicting reports. If, for instance, the tariffs are struck down, you need to be prepared for instantaneous headlines across major media outlets screaming, "Payment canceled, administration scrambled."
Right, or kiss that tariff payment goodbye.
Exactly. The rhetoric will be high stakes, designed to generate panic, fear, and clicks.
So the key guidance for our curious learner audience is to look past the immediate headlines and understand the administration's contingency plan we just detailed.
Absolutely. Do not panic and accept the immediate media narrative that the payment is dead if the tariffs are struck down. The essential information we have uncovered is that the administration has already established a clear path to generating equivalent revenue through other duties. You must understand that contingency plan, that the revenue source changes names, not function, before accepting the immediate media panic. Wait for the dust to settle and look for analysis that acknowledges the political commitment to restoring the funding stream.
Let's discuss the current status of the payment. As of this mid-December deep dive, where do we stand for the fixed income recipient hoping to see that $2,000 soon?
The payment is still very much up in the air. No one definitively knows if it will happen or precisely when or who will qualify based on the final income rules.
Right.
But what we do know is that the administration is highly committed to pursuing it, and they are willing to utilize legal and political gymnastics to ensure the funding source is maintained, regardless of the Supreme Court's immediate decision on the current tariff structure.
And crucially, that high political conviction is what gives millions of people hope. It suggests that even if there are delays, or if the initial amount is split over time, the political will to provide some form of relief is extremely strong, especially for those in the low-income brackets who stand to benefit the most. We will continue to advocate for and track every development regarding this money and all benefits administered by Social Security. As we conclude this deep dive, let's reinforce the key facts so you, the listener, walk away with the most crucial information distilled clearly.
Okay. The potential benefit is a maximum of $2,000. The funding source is the revenue generated from duties on imports, which is currently tied up in contested emergency tariff revenue.
Right.
The Supreme Court ruling on the legality of that funding is imminent. And the most important piece of knowledge: the administration has vowed to find alternative legal ways to fund the payment by reinstating the duties under a different executive or legal mechanism if the current tariffs are struck down.
We've established that this potential $2,000 payment is not a small matter. It could provide essential financial breathing room, stability, and dignity to those struggling, whether they rely on Social Security, SSI, or other fixed income benefits. But we must address the complex economic consequence hidden within the administration's contingency plan.
And this is the final provocative thought for you to mull over. We've established that if the administration is forced to act quickly to fund this payment, they will utilize other avenues to reinstate duties on imports, effectively bringing in the same revenue stream, just under a different legal name.
Okay.
The question we need to consider is this: if the administration is so committed to funding this payment via reinstated duties, how might the imposition of those new duties, even if called something other than tariffs, impact the costs of everyday imported goods, like groceries, electronics, clothing, or essential supplies, for the very low-income consumers who are supposed to benefit?
That is a critical calculation. Economists generally agree that duties on imports, regardless of what they are called, are often passed down to the consumer in the form of higher prices. Could the inflationary effect of these new duties on imports, in effect taxing those goods, neutralize the financial benefit of the $2,000 dividend?
It raises a profound question about the net benefit. If the administration taxes, say, imported durable goods or food staples to generate the $272 billion needed for the payment, and that resulting inflation adds $200 a year to a low-income family's cost of living, then the real benefit of the one-time $2,000 payment is reduced over time by the structure of its own funding mechanism. This is the complex economic trade-off that future developments will reveal.
Absolutely. For now, the call to action is simple and vital. Stay informed. Do not let immediate panicked headlines confuse you. Understand the administration's contingency plan we discussed today, that the political commitment is strong enough to survive a Supreme Court loss, and follow reliable sources for the precise eligibility rules when they are finally announced.
And we are here to provide that clarity. We will continue to track the ruling and any subsequent announcement regarding the eligibility thresholds and payment timelines, ensuring you get the clearest picture possible of this major potential financial benefit.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We look forward to seeing you again soon with the next.
If you're relying on a fixed income, whether that's Social Security, SSDI, SSI, or VA benefits, then you know just how quickly $2,000 can just evaporate, especially when inflation is running this hot. That's why the update we are diving into today is, well, it's absolutely critical. Right now, there is a specific proposal on the table from the president for a substantial $2,000 stimulus dividend.
And this proposal is pretty unique because it's not meant for everyone. We're talking about a payment that's designed very specifically to put money back into the hands of those who genuinely need it most. So it's targeting low-income and middle-income Americans, and it makes a real point of excluding high earners.
And this right here is the essential takeaway you need to understand right now. If your income comes strictly from fixed benefits, your eligibility for the full $2,000 payment is, well, it's virtually guaranteed. That's based on every historical income threshold we've ever seen used for this type of relief.
We've taken a stack of sources detailing this whole proposal, including the public announcement from back on November 10th. So we're going to unpack the political thinking behind using tariff revenue to fund this. We'll reveal exactly who qualifies based on the mechanics, like adjusted gross income. And most importantly, we will dissect those critical financial protections, the ones needed to ensure this money doesn't accidentally jeopardize your eligibility for other vital programs like Medicaid or SNAP.
Stick with us. It's time for the deep dive into the $2,000 dividend.
Okay, so let's start with a reality that, it really drives this whole conversation. Financial pressure. We know that for so many of our listeners who rely on those fixed incomes, whether it's retirement, disability, veterans benefits, every little unexpected expense, it hits hard. Every time the price of gas or groceries goes up, that constant, cost of living strain is precisely why we are focusing today on this pretty significant proposed financial update. A $2,000 figure that, if it passes, could provide some really crucial breathing room. That's the specific update we're dissecting. The proposal for a new $2,000 fourth stimulus check, or as the phrasing in the source material calls it, a dividend.
A dividend.
Yeah, and it's important to stress that distinction. This isn't just some vague idea. The proposal has a very clear, very explicit focus on a highly specific group of people.
And that focus, it comes directly from the source material context. There was a public posting made on November 10th. And that posting, it clearly states the intent here. This $2,000 payment is directed right towards low-income and middle-income Americans.
Right, and the emphasis of that announcement is what makes it so important for you, the listener. The originator of the proposal, he took great pains to make it, to paraphrase the source material, unambiguously clear that this payment is not for high-income individuals.
Right.
And that proactively addresses one of the biggest criticisms we saw with prior relief efforts.
Oh, absolutely. That they were too broad.
Exactly, that they sometimes benefited people who just weren't facing any real financial hardship. Here, the stated intent is the complete opposite. It's about prioritizing low and middle income inclusion.
And that proactive exclusion of the high earners, it's so important both politically and financially. When you look back at the other stimulus efforts, that question of who gets cut off, it always generated this massive debate.
It did.
It really complicated the rollout of the payments. So by making the primary target so specific from the very beginning, the message is aimed directly at reassuring those low and middle income brackets that they are the priority.
Absolutely. And when we look at the context of the payment, the proposed funding source is where the political and economic intrigue really lies. The proposal details that the money is intended to come from specific tariff revenues.
Tariff revenues. Now that's fascinating.
Isn't it?
Because it completely reframes the money. It suggests the payment wouldn't be adding directly to the national debt, or at least not in the, the standard way through new borrowing. So can we unpack that, the implication of using tariffs here?
It's a critical political maneuver.
Yeah.
I mean, by sourcing the funds from tariffs, which are basically just taxes collected on imported goods, the administration is trying to neutralize those immediate arguments about fiscal responsibility.
The ones that always come up with stimulus programs.
Always. Critics of previous stimulus checks, they argue that they were inflationary because they were funded through debt. By using tariffs, the argument completely shifts. The new argument becomes, this is revenue that's already been collected, and it's simply being directed back to the citizens who need relief the most. It allows the whole measure to be framed as both immediate relief and fiscal prudence.
That really does make the proposal much more resilient against opposition, at least opposition that's focused only on deficit spending.
Precisely. And there's a secondary fiscal measure that's embedded right in that announcement, which ties directly back to that funding mechanism.
Okay.
The proposal states that any funds left over after these $2,000 payments are made would be used to pay down the national debt.
So it's a two-part proposal, really. You've got the immediate targeted relief and then a kind of fiscal accountability measure for whatever's left. This helps define the scope. But let's clarify the exact nature of this money. Is this intended to be a one-time payment? Is it a recurring increase or just some kind of temporary emergency relief?
Based on the phrasing in the posting, specifically the word payments and the mention of money left over, it is very clearly structured as a one-time financial dividend.
Okay.
It mirrors the structure of the past stimulus checks we saw back in 2020 and 2021. So it's critical for listeners to understand this distinction. This is relief, it's provided once, and it's funded by a specific revenue stream.
And let's elaborate on why that distinction matters so much. A permanent structural change, like, a cost of living adjustment, a KHLA, that permanently changes the size of your monthly benefit check.
Right. Every month.
Every single month. This $2,000 dividend does not do that. It is a lump sum. It's designed for an immediate injection into your budget. It's a dividend, not an ongoing raise. So if this moves forward, this is a significant one-time lump sum you need to plan for, but it won't be reflected in your checks 6 months from now.
Okay, so understanding that this is a one-time dividend, it's funded by tariffs, and it's for low and middle income Americans, we have to move to the most critical, practical question. Who qualifies? How does that low to middle income criteria translate into real eligibility for someone on Social Security or, say, SSDI?
Well, we have to reiterate the source material's core criteria. Low and middle income USA citizens. That's the foundation. Now, let's apply that criteria to the technical mechanics that actually determine eligibility, specifically the adjusted gross income or AGI litmus test.
Right. Let's get into the mechanics of fixed income inclusion, because this is where that idea of guaranteed inclusion for many fixed income recipients really lies.
Absolutely. The discussion surrounding this proposal, it explicitly addressed nearly all the major fixed income groups. So we're talking about
We're talking Social Security retirees, SSDI beneficiaries, SSI recipients, survivors, spousal benefits, VA benefits, and even RRB Railroad Retirement Board benefits. For the vast majority of people receiving benefits from these programs, they fall squarely within that targeted income bracket.
Now, you mentioned AGI. For listeners who might be hearing that term for the first time or maybe just need a refresher on why the IRS uses it, let's explain it simply. What is adjusted gross income and why is it the key factor here?
So AGI is your gross income, that's all the money you earn in a year, but minus specific allowed adjustments or deductions, things like certain retirement contributions or educator expenses. The government uses AGI, not your total gross income, because it's meant to be the fairest gauge of your actual disposable income and your ability to pay.
Right.
And when it comes to stimulus checks, AGI is the mechanical line in the sand.
And the essential point for our audience is that for many fixed income recipients, their primary source of funds, Social Security, is often partially or even completely excluded from that AGI calculation. Or their total AGI is just very, very low to begin with.
Precisely. The litmus test that came up in the source material discussions, and it's a reliable reference point, was this. Is your AGI generally below $50,000 a year?
Mm-hmm.
If you are living strictly on fixed income benefits, the answer is overwhelmingly, unequivocally, yes.
That $50,000 benchmark, even though it's informal, it provides a really crucial reference point for that low and middle income definition. So if your annual income is below that figure, you are considered low or middle income in the context of previous relief measures. And that virtually guarantees you are within the sweet spot for this $2,000 payment.
Let's lock this down with some specific data points just to make it crystal clear. The average Social Security retirement benefit right now is a little over $2,000 a month.
Okay.
That totals around $24,000 a year.
$24,000 a year. I mean, compared to that $50,000 benchmark, that's less than half.
Right. That $24,000 a year average is, and this is a quote, well below any threshold that they're going to put in place. And that's based on the precedent we have from past relief. This huge buffer is the primary reason why fixed income recipients should feel highly confident about their eligibility for the full $2,000 payment.
But we should cover the complexity of the phase-out mechanism, especially for those folks who might have a little additional income, because this eligibility isn't based on an arbitrary feeling. It's based on historical income thresholds and phase-outs that were used during the 3 previous stimulus checks, the $1,200, the $600, and the $1,400 payments. Can you detail how that phase-out structure worked?
Sure. The structure implemented an AGI threshold, so anyone under that primary threshold was eligible for the full payment. Simple. But anyone slightly above it faced a reduction, or a phase-out. This meant the payment decreased proportionally, usually was something like $5 for every $100 you earned over the threshold. And that continued until you hit a certain higher income level where the payment just disappeared entirely.
And what were those specific historical numbers for the AGI threshold? We can use these as a pretty powerful projection for this proposed $2,000 dividend.
Okay, so based on historical precedent from 2020 and 2021, the threshold for an individual to get the full payment was typically an AGI of $75,000 or less per year.
$75,000.
For an individual. And for a married couple filing jointly, that threshold was generally $150,000 or less per year.
$75,000 for an individual, $150,000 for a married couple. When you compare those numbers to the $24,000 average Social Security benefit,
the buffer is massive.
It's huge. Over $50,000 of additional income before the phase-out even begins to kick in.
And that buffer is a stronger guarantee than most people realize. The conclusion for you, the learner, is very clear. If you are listening and you're living strictly on Social Security, SSI, SSDI, or VA benefits, your AGI is almost certainly well below the threshold for the full $2,000 payment.
But let's introduce a scenario where the phase-out might matter, just for clarity. What if a retiree receives that average $24,000 in Social Security benefits, but they also have a small pension, or maybe they work part-time, and that brings their total AGI up to, let's say, $60,000.
That person would still be in excellent shape. I mean, $60,000 is still well below the historical $75,000 threshold for the full payment.
So they get the full $2,000.
They get the full $2,000. The phase-out only becomes relevant for individuals with AGIs that are getting close to that $75,000 mark. So if the phase-out starts at 75 and it ends at 80,000, then someone earning 77,500 would get about half the payment.
That deep dive into the historical numbers, it really does provide the necessary peace of mind. The intent of the proposal targets you, and the historical structure confirms that your in-kind level places you firmly in the eligible category for the full dividend.
And just for clarity, we should remember that small exception we noted. Those few thousand individuals who get the maximum Social Security benefit, which can push them over 60,000 a year.
Right.
Even that income is often below the phase-out initiation point. But it's just important to remember that this group represents the highest end of the fixed income spectrum. For the vast majority of recipients, especially those on SSI or the standard SSDI benefit, their AGI falls so far below the threshold that eligibility is just not a concern.
Okay. We know the intent, and we know the target audience is highly likely to qualify. Now we have to address the major source of skepticism. As we see constantly in the feedback, the sentiment is often, I'll believe it when I see it.
And that's understandable.
We have to acknowledge that while the proposal is clear, the concrete details of implementation are, well, they're still missing.
That skepticism is warranted by, the speed of legislative processes, but we can manage expectations by detailing what those missing steps are. We need clarity on two major missing details that will transform this from a proposal into an actual reality.
Okay, what specifically do we need clarity on?
First, the precise dollar amount for the income threshold. While we can reliably project it'll be around that 75,000 AGI mark for individuals, we need Congress or the relevant executive body to officially announce where they will draw that line in the sand for this specific dividend.
Right, the final number.
The final number. And second, we need the specific payment schedule, the official payment dates. And those dates are only determined after the mechanism is fully funded and signed into law.
So the moment those exact thresholds and dates are announced, that's the moment this moves from proposal to certainty. Until then, the legislative process has to play out. For the listener, what does that legislative process look like here? Is this an executive order, or does Congress need to pass a bill?
Given the nature of the funding drawing from tariff revenues and tying the remainder to debt reduction, this absolutely requires legislative action. It would need to be introduced as a bill. It would have to pass through both chambers of Congress and then be signed by the president.
So there are a few hurdles.
There are, and this is why the timeline is uncertain. We are tracking a proposal that needs to become law before implementation can begin. That's why we just can't give you hard dates today.
And since we can't give hard dates, let's look at past experiences referenced in the source to project how the delivery might happen when those details are finalized. How were the previous checks delivered, and how will this one likely follow suit for the fixed income audience?
Based on prior stimulus experiences, the delivery methods are highly predictable because they really just rely on existing government infrastructure. The primary and the fastest method will be direct deposit.
Okay.
For anyone who has their bank account information linked to the SSA, the VA, or the IRS.
And critically for our audience, the direct express cards. This is the primary way many SSI and low-income Social Security recipients get their monthly funds.
Exactly. The direct express cards are absolutely essential here. If the money is routed through the Social Security Administration or the Treasury, it would use the existing electronic payment rails, which means direct express card holders would receive the payment automatically onto their cards.
That's great news.
It is. This method proved extremely efficient during prior relief efforts, and it often led to the fastest dispersal of funds among the fixed income population.
That is a huge relief. Now let's talk application. If I'm on Social Security or VA disability, do I need to worry about filling out some new application form to get this $2,000?
Reassuringly, based on the previous structure of all three stimulus checks, no new application is needed for the vast majority of existing benefit recipients.
Okay.
Eligibility is determined automatically. It's done via existing SSA, VA, or IRS records. If you are already receiving a fixed benefit, SSDI, VA disability, retirement, you are already in the system. The government has your payment method, it has your address. The system should be automatic for you.
Right. The only people who might have had to file a form in the past were those who had zero income and didn't usually file taxes. But for existing beneficiaries, it's largely automatic, which minimizes the administrative burden and really speeds up delivery once the legislation is passed.
And addressing that skepticism directly. We understand the frustration that comes with waiting for legislative details. We really do. However, maintaining a hopeful yet informed mindset mean understanding the process and watching for the next key steps. That's the passage of the bill and the setting of the exact threshold and payment dates, rather than just dismissing the possibility outright. The intent behind this is strong, and the funding source is politically novel, which gives this proposal a unique momentum.
Let's add a layer of practical advice here regarding the timeline. Based on past rollouts, once a bill is signed, how quickly could those direct express and direct deposit payments typically begin to flow? Are we talking weeks or months?
Well, once the bill is signed and the Treasury Department is authorized, the electronic payments, so direct deposit and direct express, are usually the very first ways. We saw in previous efforts that the first wave of electronic payments started hitting accounts within about 10 to 14 days of the law being enacted.
That's pretty fast.
It is. Paper checks, on the other hand, unfortunately, take significantly longer, sometimes stretching into 4 to 6 weeks.
Wow.
So if you receive your benefits via paper check, that's a good reminder to consider switching to direct deposit through the My Social Security portal to ensure you get the quickest access to this $2,000 dividend should it pass.
Delivery speed is important, but for our low-income audience, safety is everything. Once that $2,000 dividend arrives, keeping it safe and making sure it doesn't harm eligibility for other vital, means-tested programs is absolutely paramount. We have to look at the tax and benefit impact based on the structure of previous federal relief.
This section is absolutely critical, especially for SSI recipients and anyone who's using SNP, Medicaid, or housing assistance. We have to make sure this $2,000 benefit, which is designed to help, doesn't accidentally cause a disqualification for necessary long-term assistance.
Okay, let's start with flexibility. If I get $2,000, does that count as taxable income that I need to report next April?
Historically, federal stimulus checks have been classified as refundable tax credits, which legally makes them non-taxable income. So we must advise you to anticipate that this $2,000 dividend will follow that same precedent and be completely tax-free. I mean, given the nature of this payment as relief and its low-income target, classifying it as tax-free is just the standard federal procedure to maximize the benefit to you. We will, of course, confirm this detail when the final legislation is announced, but the expectation, based on all precedent, is that it will be tax-free.
Next, let's talk about benefit eligibility protection, and we need to dedicate some serious time to this. This is where SSI recipients especially need robust reassurance. If I get this $2,000 lump sum, will it count as income and jeopardize my status for Medicaid or SNP?
This is the most complex and critical area. Typically, receiving a lump sum like this could have two negative effects for SSI recipients. First, it could count as income in the month it's received, which could potentially reduce their monthly SSI payment. Second, and this is the big one, if the money isn't spent immediately, it counts toward the resource limit.
And the resource limit for an individual on SSI is notoriously low. It's just $2,000. So receiving a $2,000 dividend instantly puts many recipients right at or even over that threshold.
That's the danger. Without special protections written into the law, receiving $2,000 would jeopardize their resource limit and their eligibility for SSI, which, in turn, usually guarantees their eligibility for Medicaid.
A domino effect.
A huge one. However, previous relief payments were structured specifically to prevent this. Congress implemented a measure that stipulated these funds did not count as income for means-tested programs like SNP, Medicaid, or housing assistance.
But the resource limit is the trickiest part. How did they handle that?
They implemented what's often called an exclusion period. For previous stimulus checks, the funds were excluded from the SSI resource count for a period of 12 months from the date of receipt.
12 months?
A full year. And that provided a full year for the recipient to use the funds. Pay off high-interest debt, fix a necessary appliance, catch up on rent without losing their SSI or Medicaid benefits.
So that legislative protection is absolutely vital. We need confirmation that this $2,000 dividend will receive similar, specific language guaranteeing at least a 12-month exclusion period from the SSI resource test.
Yes.
Without that detail, that $2,000 could instantly cost someone their monthly SSI payment and their critical health coverage.
Absolutely. We track these details very closely, and you should not assume that the protection is automatic. It has to be explicitly included in the finalized bill.